You're open, you can proceed.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TBARTA meeting. My name is Renee Flowers. I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the Finance Committee meeting. We'd like to call this meeting to order. May we start by having roll call, please?
Good morning. I have Commissioner Renee Flowers,
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long,
She is en route.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
She is in her car. She will be joining by vehicle.
Correct. Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Here.
Mr. Jim Holton,
Here.
Mr. Cliff Manuel, Commissioner Reggie Bellamy, Commissioner Pat Kemp, Commissioner Kimberly Overman,
Here.
Councilmember Deborah Fix Sanders, Councilmember Lynn Hurtak, Secretary David Quinn, Secretary Okay Nandam, Mayor Ken Welch, and Mr. Ming Gao.
Here.
All right. You do have a quorum with 3.
Thank you so very much. Persons wishing to address the board can do so in either of 2 ways. Comments no more than 400 words may be sent to publiccomment@tbarta.com and will be read into the record. Written comments must be received no later than the day before the meeting. Comments must include the name, address, organization, and topic or agenda item. Please see staff prior to the meeting to complete a comment card. You will be able to provide comments for 3 minutes when recognized. Do we have anyone for public comment?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay, thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is consent agenda items, which is the approval of the August Finance Committee meeting minutes. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review those. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? If not, may I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion. Second.
It's been first and seconded as it relates to moving approval for the August Finance Committee meeting minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do we have any that are opposed? It passes unanimously. Discussion items, our strategic planning, and Mr. David Green will bring that forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out real quickly that there are no financial statements in your packets this month because we just closed out our year on September 30th. It takes several weeks in order to post everything that we need to at the end of a fiscal year. So the September statements are always provided in November.
Right. So
we'll be providing those to you in your packets next month.
thank you very much.
So the item on our agenda is strategic planning and TBARTA's future, which we've been talking a lot about over the past several months. We had a workshop last month to discuss our path forward, but we didn't really get through the entire agenda, and I thought it might be helpful to continue that conversation today. I went into the workshop hopeful that we'd be able to resolve some of the issues we've been plagued with, but I don't think we really accomplished that and feel that we're now faced with an even greater challenge. Melly and I reported in August that we'd be able to safely make it through the end of fiscal year 24 as long as we continued receiving state cap funds and local contributions. But after the workshop, it seems that even our local funding might be in question. If we lose that funding source as well, we'll basically be reduced to the funds that we currently have in hand, which will carry us probably into very early 2024 before we start running into cash flow problems. So with funding always having been the big question for TBARTA, I wonder if it's time to start talking about just repealing the agency altogether. And I wanted to offer that up to the committee for discussion, as well as any follow-up comments from the workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday at the Pinellas County Commission's workshop, the topic was brought up because we had asked Barry for authorization Barry was asking us for authorization to make the payment on behalf of Pinellas County. And there was some conversation about the viability of the organization continuing if, in fact, the city of St. Petersburg is not going to make their contribution, if Tampa, Hillsborough won't make their contribution. And I believe the other was Hernando. Was it Hernando, Commissioner Long? Was the other Hernando?
Yeah.
We know what the issues are regarding the state, and we've not been able to get around that. We've been able to, with the help of our chair and others, getting then President Wilt Simpson, to push, and so a combined effort between the House and the Senate, but it never made it past the governor's desk. And that's no fault of the agency, in my opinion. That's no fault of the agency or the board or any of the staff. We were also given some good history, and it saddened me to learn that the historical way that this organization was made up by the legislature, but not funded by the legislature. And so I hate to use the words doomed to fail, but it certainly was difficult to succeed when you are established, but not funded. And for the dollars that it would take to manage this operation, I'm not sure if there would be the willingness of the entities to provide the financial resources adequately so we could do our work. I shared, where we are with the gondola project study, and some of the other things that we have on the boards. But I think the end decision of the county was, I know they wanted to see what was going to come from the discussion as it relates to potential dissolution of the agency rather than support providing the funds. And then it's decided today that after 2023, there will be a dissolution. So that was, that's the summation of the conversation. It was a much longer conversation, but that's the summation of it. And I tell you, I will end by saying this. Yesterday, we did celebrate the Sun Runner. It was wonderful. And I wasn't on the board 15 years ago, but to hear how long it took to get that going and all of the negative things were being said and the fighting for funding on so many levels, the exchange of representation on the board, just all of the things that played into that. But yesterday was the culmination of 15 years of hard work. People saying it wasn't going to happen. And some of those people who said it wasn't going to happen, they were the first ones jumping on that bus to take the ride up. And so that gave me some hope that transportation just isn't easy. A lot of people talk about it. We all want it. But sometimes when I say we, I'm talking in general, not anyone here specific. We just don't have the gumption to do what needs to be done, which is to fund transportation. Public transportation is never intended to be a complete moneymaker. Never. But in order to help move your city forward and provide that metropolis that we see so many other cities capable of doing, helps to attract business, because now you're taking some cars off the road. People can get to work quickly and get back quickly if that's what they need to do, or have meetings. We look at other places where you don't want to own a car, like New York. You don't want to own a car. You want to take public transit. And you want to have all of the different possibilities for transportation. So it is sad, but we need to have the conversation because if funding doesn't come, we won't be able to operate. I will also share that I provided the PowerPoint presentation that you gave us that shows the authority that TBARTA has, that other entities like PSTA HART and others, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, they don't have that ability. And so, giving up TBARTA means somewhat giving up those points of strength. And then what would be other mechanisms that those organizations would be able to do some of the things that we do or would be capable of doing based on that. So I thank you for bringing the conversation forward. I know it's not easy. It's not easy for staff sitting out here because you're in limbo, like, am I going to have a job? And I brought that up yesterday. Persons get antsy, rightfully so, because they have responsibilities. And so they start looking for other options when they start hearing conversations like this. And you can't blame them, but it's difficult to hold it together, when you're having these kinds of conversations. So thank you, David, for bringing that up and for all that you've tried to do to hold it together. It's not been easy. And I will just move down the row and go from person to person and allow, that's the attorney.
Okay, that was the chair. If she had an opinion that you could offer in terms of how that might operate. But I would like
How
to
that will
offer some
look.
comment as well.
Well, let's go for comments. Let's do comments and then let's, based on the comments, then let's ask legal how that may look.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Commissioner Overman, but I serve on, I've only been here for about a year. I serve as the representative for HART, for Hillsborough County's transportation system. And my observation since I've gotten here has been an interesting perspective. I not only serve as the chair of Board of Hillsborough County's Board of County Commissioners, but I serve as the vice chair for HART. So wearing both hats, if I choose to, for a minute, I've always been very interested in what TBARTA was doing because I truly believe that there's an opportunity for us regionally to work together to come to work on transit-related efforts. But I'm not, I'm solely aware of the bias politically in this state towards transit. It's very real. You know, when we're Hillsborough County and HART are in a position where we're not able to generate the revenues to invest in our transportation that includes transit. Due to political interests that are interested in not paying for transportation. And are compromising our voters' ability to actually invest in our transportation. When we sit on this board and say, we recognize we would like to see some partnership in making things happen, but bottom line, we don't have the resources. HART doesn't have a dedicated revenue source to invest in its own capital for its own buses, much less share in the participation of a regional transit project. It's not a matter of they don't want to. The reality is the revenue's not there. We are losing bus inventory on a annual basis. Our bus inventory has dropped over the last year or so because our bus lines are exceeding their life expectancy significantly. As you know, because we brought to this board's attention in various different circumstances, we have a maintenance yard that is inadequate. Then we're raising the capital for it. But if you can't work on the buses, you don't have the facility to work on the buses, how do you participate in a regional program when you're trying to prioritize how you pay for things? And as you know, we've got a referendum on the board on the ballot right now because Hillsborough County chose to appeal the judge's order and has stay and are encouraging our voters to continue voting as they would, however that looks like, but to make sure that we have the board is protecting our voters' right to vote on transportation. It is difficult to support an agency that doesn't have the revenue. Now, that being said, that's frustrating. When we find our leadership in Tallahassee is unable to understand the value of investing in a regional transportation effort, that's challenging, to say the least. But I don't think the local folks here that are trying to find opportunities believe that it's in the region's best interest to not do so. So, and that's why I wanted to probably explore, because I'm new enough to not know for sure, what our options are if we're in a position where the voters and leaders of this state are just not willing to invest, but we need to do the planning. We need to do the due diligence to see where opportunities are and protect our residents' opportunity to invest in it long term. Then moving the agency to a planning agency might make sense so that we can continue the work that we're doing until we recognize there needs to be a commitment to a diverse method of helping people get around. Because right now I'm in a situation where our public safety teams can't get through intersections. They can't get to your house when it's burning down. They can't get there when you've got a crime occurring in your neighborhood because they're sitting behind a whole lot of cars because we don't have the technology to invest in opening up that street light or that stoplight to allow traffic to get out of its way so that they can move to a place with emergency. So when we talk about public safety, transit's part of that equation. Investing in transportation is part of that equation. So I'm not willing to throw in the towel, but I'm also very clear where Hart and Hillsborough County, the reason we've pushed back on things is not because there's not a want. It's just that the resources are not available in Hillsborough County, nor are they at Hart to be able to effectively participate in it if the state legislature isn't either. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Those were very good comments. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the workshop. I came into the workshop last month with a hope that there was a direction, there was a plan that could be put forth. And I just wasn't able to leave the meeting with that direction or plan. So consequently, I did ask our Hernando Board of County Commissioners to reject funding TBARTA for this upcoming fiscal year. I do recognize that in theory, TBARTA has a place for regional transit, but it's very difficult from a geographical standpoint. I mean, we have a very a city that's been around for a while, so there isn't much land available. Obviously, as Commissioner just indicated, funding is an issue. It's an issue locally, it's an issue regionally, it's an issue from the state and federal. And so without projects, without a plan, without something to point to that I guess we can all get behind from a regional standpoint, I don't see a pathway forward, and I would support the solution.
Shannon? Commissioner, I'm sorry, Long.
Familiarity, that is that.
Yeah, and I apologize.
No worries at all. Well, my position on TBARTA has not changed, and I found Commissioner Oberman's comments particularly interesting. And while I recognize that a lot of it is because you haven't been involved in the history, you all know that sit on this board that I've been involved in this issue for over, I was just remarking to Commissioner Holton, for over 50 years in this region. And I do not agree that it is that people don't want public transportation. And I would like to give you an example of why I say that. When we developed the Sunrunner, which we're all so incredibly proud of, we had tremendous resistance. It was unbelievable, to the point when we would go, and you know this because you came with us on one of those missions, when we would go to Washington, D.C. to speak to our congressional folks, both on the House side and in the Senate. The first words out of their mouth when we would sit at the table, talk to me about these letters that I've received from so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And those of us that were there knew all about those letters. We had heard from in public hearing every one of those people, and they were relentless, just like they were over in your county, Commissioner. And the people rose up, truly, all along the beaches and First Avenue North and South, where they thought they were going to be, totally incapable of getting back and forth without using the Sunrunner. Long story short, we prevailed. You know how we prevailed? We prevailed because we had incredible leadership at PSTA. Our CEO and the entire staff were driven to work in the best interest of our citizens. And I want you to know that 2 nights ago, I traveled from Seminole to the Armature Works in Tampa. That trip should have taken me at most maybe 40-45 minutes. Would you not agree? I'm pretty sure. It took me 2 hours and 10 minutes to get there. It wasn't just bumper to bumper. It was stop and go on both sides of the bay. going north and going south. And Commissioner Overman, with the highest of respect, I want you to know that as long as I've been on TBARTA, which dates back to when it was first conceived in the state legislature, Hillsborough County has been a major block to us being able to move forward. In fact, sitting right in your seat right there, several years ago, your representative said she was railing about the 41-mile feasibility study to the point where she actually said, and I'm not making this up, it's on tape, nobody goes from Hillsborough to Pinellas, and they don't come from Pinellas to Hillsborough. On that day, I had been 4 times back and forth across the bridge. So that did not hit me very well. And I thought to myself, is this person living in a cave? But it's not representing the people of your county. And so you've been done a great disservice, in my opinion. The second thing you made reference to were the resources. Well, guess what? We didn't have the resources at PSTA. You know what we did? We went out and we groveled and we begged and we found them. And that is because we pulled no stops. We used our state advocacy people. We used our federal advocacy people, and we found a way to make that happen. We have a cap on, we're a public agency. We have a cap on our millage rate. We are at the cap, and we've been at the cap for many years. There was huge resistance when we took that last step and moved it up to the cap, but we knew on the board that we needed it. And our CEO never wavered in pushing for us to go forward. So the thing I find absolutely amazing is that we have never had that kind of leadership from our executive directors. And that is one of the things we have not discussed on this board. We have gone through many, most of them from the beginning until we hired David have all been political people put in place who knew nothing about transportation or how it was funded or where the money came from. I could tell you horror stories about where the invoices were going before David came to us. They were being stuffed in a drawer in the secretary's desk because she didn't know what to do with them. Well, long story short, the reason we hired David was because of his expertise in transportation, and he actually knew how the funding process worked. But from his mouth to all of us, tell me when the last time you heard a recommendation from him before today.
I'm going to suggest maybe when we considered moving forward on exploring the right of way for the CSX line and a method of doing so.
When we already knew from our FDOT people that CSX was not interested.
At that time.
And we also knew that the state of Florida would never allow us to create a very big transit program based around leased land. My point being, you cannot keep on doing the same thing with public money over and over and over again and expect a different result. I heard Commissioner Flowers make reference to the huge powers that the regional, the Tampa Bay TBARTA has. I've never heard David explore any of those as an opportunity for us to gain more funding. And I'm sorry, David, I know this is uncomfortable for you. This is not a conversation that you and I haven't had many, many times. You know, when I've asked, well, let me give you another example that's very recent. TBARTA made a presentation to the Clearwater City Council on the gondola plan study that had been done. And at the end of it, the mayor, because the city has always been on and off, but pretty much continuously interested in the gondola. The very first conversation we ever had about the gondola started with the city of Clearwater. And so the mayor asked, well, what are the next steps? What's the recommendation? Is there an action plan? And Mr. Chaddock, who is the one that delivered the presentation, said, well, Mayor, I guess that's whatever you would like it to be. There was no action plan attached to it, and there was no recommendation for how to move forward, unless I totally beeped off the planet and missed the entire thing. Maybe you can correct us, David, if that's wrong.
Yeah, we presented the study to the city of Clearwater. It's a city of Clearwater project, so it's in their hands as to how they want to
Correct.
proceed.
But was there a recommendation for TBARTA about how to move forward?
It's a
Yes or no?
That wouldn't be a yes or no.
It is a yes or no, Commissioner, with respect.
Yeah, but he was explaining to you. So I understand. I get where you're going, but I apologize because everyone else spoke and I did not interrupt them. So
It's okay. I clearly get that I'm very passionate about this issue, and I'm also very straightforward, and it's not easy to be. What?
It's just a echo back. See, it's just you hear it?
It's the sound on this.
Yeah, it's just an echo back.
Oh, no, it's somebody else having a conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
It's an echo back.
Oh, I've been listening. Uh-oh. How are you? Anyway, I don't need to wax on. You get my point. Until we're willing to have those very tough conversations, until we're willing to sit and embrace and talk about what the other options are. While I support the mission, I know we need the mission. I do not think that this group, which we've already established in a prior at the collaborative lab, was dysfunctionally formed to begin with and included parts of our state that were not in a planning mode, part of the region. And it was done for political reasons, and a lot of us know what they were. Certainly our state advocate does. I think we have to do something different, because for those of us that are elected, some of us sitting here are not, we have a responsibility to our citizens. We're putting public money into an organization. It doesn't sound good to say it, but it's dysfunctional in how we operate.
I left my notebook in the car, so I have to go back and get it.
Good
So maybe I have to keep
That's
going.
fine.
Well, while you're at it, I did the same thing, but right
Oh,
now,
you want me to get it?
you can't.
Janet.
Test limit.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Holton. Yeah, I was calling your name.
Jim Holton.
I was calling his name.
Okay, I'm just being helpful.
I'm just listening. So
Yeah. Okay.
I'll keep listening.
Oh, okay.
I'll go get my notebook.
And you can listen with me because I'll put it back.
Okay, you listen. I'll just help my steps.
Chair, you want me to go ahead or
Yes,
wait
sir.
till?
No, I want you to go ahead.
Yeah, well, it is very much with a heavy heart that I make these comments, because I was the inaugural chair when TBARTA was reformed to be a transit agency appointed by Governor Scott. We all had high hopes at the time. There was a joint commitment, I think, throughout the state for regionalism. The problem, though, just to Shakespeare, lies not in the stars, but in ourselves. And the truth of the matter is this board has always had self-interest of different members, I believe, ahead of regionalism as a whole. And unfortunately, that just is the way it is. I cannot blame Tallahassee for what they've done, because I have heard numerous times you don't speak with a consistent voice there. And with all respect to everyone, that's maybe not the way it should be anyway. We have a DOT that is really responsible for state planning. They do a fantastic job. I had the pleasure of being chair of the Transportation Commission. The DOT has its own mechanism within DOT, the SIS and other things, to do regionally significant projects. The MPOs have that responsibility. So there's a lot of overlap. I don't think that we need to necessarily pinpoint any one problem. Obviously, the funding is an issue now. That's the immediate issue. But we have agencies in place now that are very effective that could do the work. What we need to do is refocus the political will to get everyone together and say, let's move forward, regardless of what government does it. Let's get the people to speak and demand transit in this area. The thing that really impressed me the most serving the many years I have served was a comment. Actually, it was at HART headquarters. And a student from USF who had recently moved here from the West Coast, said, I came to Florida with great high hopes. I love it here. I want to go to school here, work here. But I come from a generation that really doesn't want or need an automobile. But unfortunately, I can't get around. I can't get to downtown from my school. I can't get to West Shore. I can't get to wherever I'm going, and it's a contorted system to have to take the buses and so forth. So do something. That moved me. I mean, this is what our challenge was to do by the people, and instead we ran into all kinds of political discourse and this and that. So I think it's time to refocus our energy on what the citizens here want. And first and foremost, let the DOT and the existing MPOs who were state and federally charged with doing this planning do their work. And whatever role TBARTA can play, I don't know, but personal recommendation would be to defer to the legislature to make that decision, whether it's dissolution, continuation, in some form or the other. But I think we need to acknowledge that fiscally right now, we are basically insolvent. We need to have a strong recommendation to wind this agency down in a timely fashion. And then just ask our state leaders, to move forward with existing frameworks and let DOT, come up with carrying the torch from here on out. And again, this board is somewhat oddly constructed. I'm an appointee, so I owe my fiduciary obligation to the appointing officer, who is the governor. A lot of you are elected by the representatives from your areas, so you owe a responsibility to them. So there is inherent conflict within this board anyway. So realistically, the best mechanism for planning is a state agency like the DOT, and the federally chartered MPOs. And I couldn't close without saying too, that as I have preached all along, the MPOs need to take the initiative to merge, and they're going to improve regionalism, and they're going to improve the amount of money we get to this area if they come together, merge, and go with one voice to Washington. And that to me is the essence of the problem we have in this agency, is we never spoke with one voice. We had many voices all chiming in. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just go to each person and then I'll come back to you, but take a note for your thoughts so you don't forget. Commissioner Starkey, you would be the last person. We've just kind of gone down and allow persons to express their thoughts.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how long I've been on this board, maybe 5 or 6 years now. I think you were chair. I think you were a brand new chair, maybe.
Mhm.
I don't feel like we've made one step forward since the time I joined the board, sadly. It's been a very frustrating board. And I listened to what you said, Commissioner Overman. And we've heard Hillsborough talk a lot about their internal issues with their transit within your county. But I'm always reminded that this is where we're supposed to talk about regional projects. And we all have, none of us have unlimited budgets within our counties or cities to do what we really want to do. But I've always felt that sitting on this board, we had a call to try and solve the regional problem. And I've never had money and then gone out and looked, never had the luxury of having the money, then gone and looked for a way to spend it. Except for one time when I was on the Swift Mud PA Basin board. We had too much money. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring it to Pasco because we didn't have the matching dollars. But we took care of it of that. The governor got rid of those and we rolled the millage back. And we did find a project that was cost affordable, it appeared, for us to solve, put our toe in the water on a regional transit solution. And we had a lot of help from the state. They were going to pay a big portion of it. And it wasn't a train, which is far sexier than a bus. And we kept saying, if you remember, don't call it a bus. We're going to call it something else. And most of us got behind it, but we moved forward a little bit, but we couldn't take it to the finish line because of one of, all the partners had to be together. And I know that Hillsborough really likes the CSX line, and so do we, but it's interesting that your county talks about not having any money, but they're pushing the CSX solution, which is the most expensive one. So I don't know, I get confused sometimes on some of our partners' points, but as far as I'm concerned, I think we've reached a dead end in this format, and we have to look for another one. And you brought up the regional MPO, and I've been doing a little research on that, and I think that that's probably where we need to start looking to find a regional solution. And Pasco knows that we're growing fast, like Southern Hillsborough, and Hernando, here it comes. And we owe it to our citizens to find a solution. So I personally don't think it's going to be here in this format at TBARTA. That's where I am with that.
Thank you. Commissioner,
Thank you.
and then I'll go to legal about, I'm sorry. I don't
She
know
wants
if
to speak.
No, I'll wait.
Okay. And I don't know if you heard on the phone, then we were gonna hear from the attorney.
Okay.
As it relates to how it will look for the unwinding.
Okay.
So we'll go here and then Commissioner Long, and then we'll go to the attorney.
And I truly appreciate
And
the
then we'll move
comments
on
that
to
have
the
been
next
made
item.
so far. And I recognize it's very frustrating. It's not like our leadership hasn't tried to generate the revenues to be able to invest in our transportation. We did in 18, voters voted for it. And, there were parties that decided that they were going to fight it. They've raised their head again. My prayer is that our residents that are wise enough to know that we need to invest in transportation, all of it, or that our MPO members and TPO members have designed specifically not only for Hillsborough, but also on a regional basis. Because HART has had on its priority list for well over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even more than that, to explore, an opportunity to participate in a regional solution using possibly the CSX lines, because they did come from Hernando all the way down through the area and served all three of our primary counties and partners, and 4 in the case of Hernando. So there's been an effort to work on regional. We have worked very hard out of Hillsborough to build the ferry. And just as, it requires cooperation, not everybody wanted to play. And so there have been situations where Hillsborough is not the only one that says, no, I'm not going to play. But I will say this. Yes, I am relatively new. True. I've been talking about rail since I moved, passenger rail. Since I moved to Hillsborough County in 1984, because I grew up in a community that had it. I also recognize it takes 10 to 12 years to do the planning, the environmental engineering, the negotiating with a partner who doesn't choose to, in order to explore that opportunity, and also know that right away is precious. And if there is a possibility of negotiating one, that conversation doesn't happen overnight. The ferry does provide a nice, easy, non-right-of-way compromised opportunity. And yet it is now serving us regionally and will also serve a Hillsborough and MacDill Air Force Base, which is a 2-command resource in our region that's critically important to all of us. I also understand that our TPO and MPOs have great resources and great planners in them. And our communities and our regions are very different. So I do recognize that our transportation professionals that plan for our future have always said we needed to participate regionally in many ways, but also focused on their primary responsibilities of taking care of our local transit resources, transportation resources, and safety ultimately. So I recognize that the timing here is challenging. You know, if there were a way to kind of suspend things until we could financially get our act together, that would be awesome, because I think there would be better momentum than we've experienced in the past. But I am a realist. I can't make promises to residents when there's not resources there. And it's very frustrating when residents have told us to invest in it, and yet we can't get through the political or the legal system to make it happen. So I'm sad to see that there's been much momentum in the idea of dissolving the agency, because I believe there is a real place for it. But if it has to go to the state to be able to develop a regional transportation system so that all of our partners can benefit from it, because locally we can't make it happen due to either lack of home rule ability or lack of revenue on a local level for investing in other than roads, that's problematic, and it's challenging and very frustrating, because I believe there was great, and I still think there is possibility, great opportunities to work together on the regional. David Gwynn has been a wonderful secretary for Hillsborough County, because he has made the point that to speak with one voice. And we're doing that more than we've ever done it. There has been long history of not doing so. And those possibilities do take time to change, and they are. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I just hate that the timing of this, has caused a real compromise of opportunity. And I'll stop there.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Long, and then we'll go ahead and adjourn the Finance Committee meeting because we've already gone about 15 minutes over. We'll pick up with the Policy Committee because this item is on the Policy Committee, and hopefully the chair of the Policy Committee will start with letting the attorney tell us how.
Yep, we'll just continue on.
Oh, okay.
I'll be very brief, Madam Chair. I wanted to respond, if I might, to a couple of things that Commissioner Holton made reference to, and I'm sorry, my back is a little bit to you. You'll forgive me, I'm sure. He did mention the regional MPOs, and for those of you that have never done this exercise or asked your MPO director to do it, there are about 7 or 8 regions throughout the United States who have managed to unite their counties, and one of them has 25 counties that make up their region. The reason they have been so successful with their transportation funding systems is because they have one MPO. Recognizing that fact, this was several years ago, we decided that we would hold and it might have come from TMA, I'm not quite sure, can't remember in detail. We decided to hold a workshop to discuss the opportunity of merging our region into one PO. And in order to make it very palatable to our representatives from Hillsborough, since they had been so, negative about everything, we decided to hold the meeting in Hillsborough County, and we met at the port.
Yep.
Everybody, planners, MPO people, anybody that had was a stakeholder in a regional transportation system, Secretary Gwynn, all the folks from TBARTA showed up. Guess who didn't show up? Commissioner Overman. Not one of the Hillsborough people. Not one. And so at the end of the day, when we got to the point, but I believe it was a series of workshops, because we first discussed the problem, then they brought forward some solutions and recommendations. Then we had another meeting to talk about how we wanted to move forward after we got all the info. Everybody voted yes, except for Hillsborough County. And it isn't, with all due respect, Commissioner Holton, I know you're a gubernatorial appointee.
But it isn't up to the state legislature to determine how our region wants to move forward, and maybe Mr. Pierce can speak to that, because you have to have one voice. I don't care if you're talking about regionally, the state, or Washington, DC. None of this can happen without federal, state, local money. And so the feds demand it. In fact, not too long ago, FDOT had a mandate that I forget who the transportation secretary was under that mandate, that all the MPOs that represented a region had to combine. And before we got to, and that lasted for 2-3 years, and everybody was working towards it. And then before we got there, administrations changed, and boom, it was gone. But there's too many other clogs that get in the wheel when you start thinking that the state can handle local issues. That's what your local governments are for. So that's all I wanted to speak to, was that.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll go ahead and we will adjourn the Finance Committee meeting. I do apologize for going over, but I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to share, because I know that this is a very intrinsic topic. So we'll adjourn the Finance Committee meeting and we'll roll right into the Policy Committee meeting.
Oh, okay. Good morning. Welcome to the Policy Committee. We'll call it to order and we'll do the roll call.
Good morning, Commissioner Catherine Starkey,
Here.
Commissioner Renee Flowers,
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long,
Here.
Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Here.
Mr. Jim Holcomb,
Here.
Mr. Cliff Manuel, Commissioner Reggie Bellamy, Commissioner Pat Kemp, Commissioner Kimberly Overman,
Here.
Councilmember Deborah Big Sanders, Councilmember Lynn Hurtak, Secretary David Gwynn, Secretary L.K. Nandam, Mayor Ken Welch, Mr. Ming Gao.
Here.
And you have a forum, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Persons wishing to address the board can do so in either of two ways. Comments no more than 400 words may be sent to public comment at TBARTA.com and will be read into the record. Written comments must be received no later than the day before the meeting. Comments must include the name, address, organization, and topic or agenda item. See staff prior to the meeting to complete a comment card, and you'll be able to provide comment for 3 minutes when recognized. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak to the
No.
Policy Committee?
All right. No, ma'am, you have no public comment.
Board members, I would take a motion to approve the August Policy Committee meeting minutes.
Move approval. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, we are on to discussion items, but I think you said that it was the attorney's turn to speak before we go to Dave.
Yes, Commissioner Overman asked a very good question, which was, since it seemed like the movement would be to disillusionment, what would be the opportunities, steps, possibilities of, all of us have talked about merging with this organization or that organization, the challenges of doing so, grants, both federal and state, or whatever funding we've received, how would that work? So all of that good stuff.
Okay, to the attorney.
You actually identified many of the issues, so I was just.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. So obviously you were created by an act of the legislature, so likely you've been taken from the legislature. I would need to look into it so that we identified the process and then what needed to happen with both the assets of the entity, as well as looking at your existing debt obligations, any obligations that exist under your federal grants or through other contractual obligations that the agency has. So there is some direction within the statutes on dissolution of independent special districts. And so in looking at that as it applies to TBARTA, I would just need to analyze that and come back. Another alternative that I've heard discussed was a merger with a different agency. Again, that would take a willingness of that agency. One of the agencies that has been brought up was also an agency created by the legislature and has very specific powers. So if that was going to change that agency's powers in any way or in understanding how the two would work together. Again, it would probably take an act of the legislature in order to do that. It would be something that I could look into if you so directed. And then another item that was discussed today was dealing with the composition of this board and kind of actions of this agency. And of course, again, because the agency is a legislative created agency, the legislature has it within its powers to amend that. So it could change what the powers are of the board. It could change what the composition of the board is if the current board thought that that was a direction as well.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Yes, the storms are. It's not.
That's me. That's okay. We can share. We'll tag team. Commissioner Long.
As a point of reference, Madam Attorney, from the research that I have done, both on the Regional Planning Council within our own county and with Forward Pinellas, which is our MPO here in Pinellas, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be possible to effectuate what we are trying to accomplish with a memorandum of understanding. And the reason I say that is because, again, moving back into our history, there have been times when we have been unable to pay our bills. And in an effort to get us out of the ditch, we created a memorandum of understanding from TBARTA with PSTA. Mr. Holton is very familiar with that because I believe you were chair when we did it. On top of that, not only did we dig ourselves out of the ditch, but we managed to pull down federal funding. And in spite of some heavy objection, from myself included, we also became a federal designee for federal recipient for federal money. Well, on top of that, I do believe that creating a memorandum of understanding would be in our best interest. Because though we find ourselves in this little kerfluffle at the moment, that doesn't mean that 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, as the world changes, as people begin to experience the quote unquote pain of being stuck in traffic and never being able to get anywhere on time, no matter how early you leave, things may change. And sorry, Ron, but Mr. Pierce knows full well the pain that we went through to get this statute created to begin with. And I would hate to see it be dissolved because we find ourselves in this pickle at the moment. On top of that, there is precedent with, again, the regional planning councils, because when Governor Scott came into his administration, he did away with all state funding for the regional planning councils. And I could be wrong in the number, but at the time, there were about 19 of them. Well, guess what? Not only have we continued to thrive, but we have found a relevance that we have never had before. And our welcome, Mayor.
I'm just looking for my assignment.
Pick one anyway.
Pick wherever you'd like to be.
Okay.
She hasn't. She hasn't. So back to my little story. At the time, there were about 19 of them around the state of Florida. And I think now maybe there's about 10. I'm not exactly sure of the number. But we have gained a brand new relevance that has made us more on the radar than we have ever been. And so I tell you all of that to say, I don't know that I'm in favor of just totally disbanding the entire ship. I think there are ways to do it with memorandums of understanding that could potentially let us float for a little while we keep on trying to figure out what we want to be when we finally grow up. If that makes any sense. Thank you.
Interesting. Commissioner Overby.
Thank you. I'm actually of that. I mean, I recognize that if there's no movement politically to support the agency, that's going to be, the dissolution is really all we got. But I'm not in favor of it, to tell you the truth either, because I do believe that it's critically important. The difference between a planning agency, and we've had great success with our regional planning agency that participates with our local MPOs, to really design how we address our regional challenges. And it's working well, as best I can tell, and I'm happy with that. The difference in this particular case is the mission of this organization. Is it to be a transit agency? Is it to run a regional transit system? Is it designed to actually do that? And so that if we are able to successfully plan for a regional project that our regional planning agency proposes for consideration, is this organization a transit agency to help manage that process? And I'm not clear if that was the original intent, or is that the ultimate goal? Or is that even legislatively a possibility? So I would like to see that there is still an opportunity to find regional transit solutions. That's part of the reason why I had some interest in being on board in the first place. So I'm not immediately going to suggest that dissolution is a good plan, but that's why I wanted to hear what our options were, because clearly it's sticky. There's nothing easy about deciding that dissolution is where we go. So I'm very interested in hearing what's possible.
Commissioner Holcomb, then Mr. Holcomb.
Yeah, as I said earlier, from leaving the workshop, I asked our board to not fund TBARTA. So if this board is looking at some, I don't know what the proper term would be, a hiatus or something until they get organized, I can't support that, because I can't support our taxpayer funds in Hernando County. And I would assume other representatives from their counties wouldn't want to support that either, because where is that money going that Hernando County or Pasco or Hillsborough or Pinellas or Manatee or whoever else, where's that money going to go that we would be donating, contributing each year? So either we have somewhere to go and we have a mission to present to Tallahassee to stand as one voice, or we don't have anything. So I don't see anything in between.
Mr. Holton.
Thank you, Chair. And to those points as well, I mean, all of us would like to see something potentially new come out of that. We are all dedicated to regionalism. I think we all have been. It's just structurally, there have been so many issues with TBARTA as an entity itself, and therein lies the problem. At this point, I think we have to acknowledge we are legally and financially insolvent, or will be very soon. I don't think it's appropriate at this juncture to make any recommendations to the legislature. I would give a report to the legislature saying we are in this state. We defer to your wisdom and judgment as to what to do, and not specifically advocate for this or that. I think that we have regrettably have not, succeeded in our mission as mandated by the legislature. So we need to report back to them in good faith and say, it's up to you to determine what's going to happen with us. That would be my recommendation, is to not to spend more taxpayer dollars going and advocating for this mechanism or that. And what has just happened here is indicative of what I've been saying all along. There is no one voice as to what this board is supposed to do. We are a multitude of voices having our different opinions. I think the legislature should make that determination, give them a simple report. We're insolvent. We basically, throw it to you to make the determination of if you want to kill this agency, to merge it into another agency, or to do something else.
Thank you, Commissioner Flowers. And then we're going to need to adjourn the policy meeting. So David, we didn't get to you. And I think we still need more follow-up with the attorney. So we'll have that in the general meeting. Commissioner Flowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make mine short and then defer to David so he can have the last word, if you will. I just want to remind us that, if I'm not mistaken, what I heard David say is we have the capabilities of remaining an organization through 2023, which would allow for that dialogue and conversation about what would be the best methodology to move forward, whether we could do merger with another organization, or if we could do a memorandum of understanding or whatever. So it's not, if that is the decision that we made for dissolution, it wouldn't be right now. it would be some time to go ahead and plan that out, or however, it's best suited. So I just wanted to share that. I didn't want that to get lost in the mix, and then I want to yield the rest of my time. So,
Well, we're at 10:02, so really, I think I need to adjourn the policy committee meeting, start the board meeting, and then we'll just continue discussions.
no problem.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to call to order the board meeting. We'll stand for the pledge of allegiance and then we'll take roll. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
And Mr. Cliff Manuel. Commissioner Renee Flowers.
Present.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Reggie Bellamy. Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mr. Jim Holton.
Here.
Mayor Ken Welch.
Here.
Commissioner Jeff Holcomb.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Kemp.
Here.
Where?
She's virtual.
Oh, okay.
Councilmember Deborah Fix Sanders. Councilmember Lynn Hurtak. Here. Secretary David Gwynn. Secretary LK Nandam.
This is Nicole Mills. I'm here for LK Nandam.
And Miss Nicole Mills. I was calling you last, ma'am.
Okay, persons wishing to address the board can do so in either of two ways. Comments no more than 400 words may be sent to public comment at TBARTA.com and will be read into the record. Written comments must be received no later than the day before the meeting. Comments must include the name, address, organization, and topic or agenda item. See staff prior to the meeting to complete a comment card. You will be able to provide comment for 3 minutes when recognized. Do we have anyone here who wishes to speak to our board today?
Yes, ma'am. You have one that came in via email, and we also have Mr. Ron Weaver, an attorney in the area that wanted to make a public comment in person.
Thank you. We'll go to Ron first and then we'll go. Did you say it was a comment card?
Neighbors here.
Mr.
I saw
Weaver's
Ms.
in
Weaver.
person, and then we have one that came in via email. So
Okay.
Mr. Weaver's in person first.
Yeah.
And then we have one we will read.
All right. Mr. Weaver, good morning.
Chairman, members. As a lawyer who doesn't do family law, I've heard words today I seldom like to hear, in which I fear family lawyers hear too often, which are words like attorneys and money and lack of money and differences of vision and differences of place and differences of certainty where they ought to be in family law. I'm not a family lawyer, I'm a land use lawyer, but I'd rather see this region's congestion relief and its attention to its disabled who need transportation and its unification with respect to the links of what each of you build, connecting valiantly with the other, as much in the physical road as in the mindset, to avoid a family law situation here, where neither the legislature nor the money should drive what you do, and whether you meet in a free space together voluntarily to solve the region's desperate transportation problems. I would urge you, whether you get $1 or you get $100 million from the legislature or respective governments, that you meet voluntarily in some free space, and that you meet in order to find a solution so that your governments, when they do something, can garner the guidance from the other governments. What would happen if you built that bridge? My first land use hearing was 50 years ago in North Florida, and at the end of a county deciding whether to fund a bridge or not, someone said, "What if the other county doesn't pay its half?" And the county member said, "We'll burn it down." And that's exactly what he said in the North Florida county. I don't think we need to burn down anything that we do together. I don't think we need to put trying together whether the legislature is with you for $1 or the legislature is with you for $100 million. And whether or not you have to pay to meet somewhere, or whether you have to pay an executive director or staff of 5 or staff of 100, I think you need to find together ways that when you go to your respective fundings and your respective asphalt and your respective rail and your respective future, especially for your disabled and those who most need you to attend to their needs, that you do it together as a region. And whether you meet elsewhere often enough about sunshine law impediments or not, I think you should look hard at that question and whether or not perhaps you find a way to be able to convene to share your vision, and then to share where your vision meets up with the vision of the rest of those in this region. Because we kids in the back seat are watching mom and dad, and we don't like the words money, and we don't like the word lawyers. And we don't even like the words uncertainty about each other's plans, futures, funding, opportunities, unless we do it together in the front seat. Because we, 4.1 million people affected directly today by you, are desperately in need of transportation. We have enough trouble with our county keeping the penny sales tax on the ballot. We don't need more problems up front in the front seat with respect to what we do, with respect to what we are and are not doing for transportation, what we are especially doing for the transportation disadvantage, and what we're doing for each other's future that we have one together. Because if we can't get around to our health and to our hospitals, to our education, and to each other, and to the playgrounds, and to the charitable opportunities, and to the churches and the little leagues, and to work and to play together as a region. This region has much too much at stake with 4.1 million people. The most attractive place in the world to come from did not have fighting in the front seat. The most attractive place in America to come to must not have fighting in the front seat. We need you to figure out whether you have money or legislators or lawyers or not, how can you solve this region's transportation problems, not for your sake, and not even for our 4.1 million sakes, but for the sakes of those kids who are coming along. And when they ask us, why are we still stuck in traffic? And why is Daddy always fussing about this congestion? The answer is we did at least a little something together as a region to try to deal with these mobility crises, especially for the transportation disadvantaged who are the most hurt. As I was walking in here by a bunch of Mercedes, and I rode one in myself, I was thinking to myself, there are 300,000 or 400,000 people who can't afford a Mercedes. They can't afford a bicycle party. And therefore, they need this region to get it back together. With all due respect in the front seat. I wish you all well. I wish you all money. I don't wish any more attorneys on you. I am one. I do, however, wish you life and future on the subject of getting our transportation act together. We have enough trouble with judges and the penny in Hillsborough. I would hate to see you as an opportunity to stay together, whether you've got $1 or you've got $100 million, whether you've got no staff or you've got a staff of 100, to keep the front seat focused on the mobility, not just of us 4.1 million who stand before you today, but the children and the grandchildren. We're going to be curious why we've waited as a region for the last 22 years, that we not wait another 22 years to get our transportation act together as the most attractive place in the country to come to, also known as Tampa Bay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron. Can we have the email, please?
I will read that. This is from Andrew Morris of Madeira Beach, Florida. TBARTA Governing Board. There are examples of shared use rail corridors that have intercity passenger rail, commuter rail, freight trains, and rail transit within the same right of way. Two examples that could be applicable to the Tampa Bay metro area are in San Diego and in Northern Virginia. In San Diego, the San Diego Trolley operates on dedicated tracks next to the Lausanne Corridor. The Lausanne Corridor has state-supported Amtrak service, coaster commuter rail, and BNSF freight trains sharing the same tracks. The recently completed San Diego pathing study recommended various improvements to the Lausanne Corridor to expand passenger rail and freight rail capacity. In Northern Virginia, the Washington Metro operates on dedicated tracks next to the CSX freight trains, state-supported and long-distance Amtrak trains, and VRE commuter rail. VDOT, through their Transforming Rail in Virginia program, is expanding capacity for both passenger rail and freight rail by building additional passenger rail tracks within the existing right-of-way. A combination of right-of-way from I-275, I-4, and CSX will be needed to build out passenger rail and rail transit in the Tampa Bay metro area. Will CSX be transparent and cooperative with TBARTA? Submitted by Andrew Morris of Madeira Beach.
Thank you. I would just add to that, that I was at the ULI meeting in San Diego, and I rode the trolley and I rode the train. I just took it for a ride, just to experience it. And I took a multimodal breakout. I didn't realize we'd be riding scooters. I had to take all my laptop, everything back to my room. But 40 or 50 of us rode around San Diego on scooters and had an interesting lesson on what they're doing in San Diego. So yeah, they got it going on. I'm gonna we're now on number 4, which is the CSX update. I'd like to hear that before we continue our discussion further. So I would call up, is Craig Camuso here? Good morning. And Mr. Camuso is the Regional Vice President of CSX in State Government Relations, and we welcome you here this morning.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Craig Camuso. I'm the Regional Vice President for State Government Relations with CSX. I'm actually headquartered in Atlanta. And I was thinking, we're talking about congestion. David, I thought I was going to have to call you yesterday and tell you I missed my flight after sitting in the security line in Atlanta for an hour and a half yesterday. So if there was a way we could get light rail to security lines in Atlanta, that would be. I thought it would be appropriate. I don't think your mic's on.
Okay, I thought it'd be appropriate, first to give you a little bit of background on myself and then kind of give you an update on where CSX is right now. There's been a lot going on with the company, probably. A lot of you have read about us here in the newspaper and the media of late. I've been with CSX, actually, it'll be 21 years effective November 1st. And this is my second go around covering the state of Florida. I did that first in the mid 2000s. Actually, I was at the very first meeting that we had with the state of Florida. It was myself, our then CEO, and then Governor Jeb Bush, when we talked about what would become the beginning of Sunrail. So I do have some background in Florida and what's gone on. I took some time off. You might remember Bob O'Malley, who worked for CSX, and I think will join you and the members of the elected officials here come the next election here in a couple of weeks as he's running for office in his local hometown. And Bob, of course, was with us for about 10 years and then left the company about, I guess, 5 years ago. But Bob and I actually stay in touch. We spoke yesterday, as a matter of fact. And I know kind of in talking to David and working very close with FDOT, there's some things have come up here over the last several months, including a presentation that Bob made, I guess, back in 2015, in which he kind of laid out what the CSX footprint was and what CSX might be thinking here in the Hillsborough and Tampa Bay area. Now, one thing that needs to be made clear is, believe it or not, even though that was 2015, that was 4 CEOs ago. Since that's happened, we've gone through Michael Ward. Then we had Hunter Harrison for a short while, which the company went through a drastic change. At that point, when Mr. Harrison passed away, we had Jim Foote, who just in the last month announced his retirement. And then just 3 weeks ago, we named a new CEO to the company named Joe Hendricks. And Mr. Hendricks comes from the Ford Motor Company. So he is currently out. Is the first CEO that we've had, certainly in my career, but I think in maybe the history of the railroad, that we have someone who's coming in to run CSX who is from outside the rail industry. I've had the opportunity to meet with him. I've had dinner with him. He's a good man and is very open about his positions with our employees, with our customers, and with the communities through which we run. He is currently, though, out learning the railroad. I mean, he is literally spending his time on office cars trying to learn the railroad, and has already been to the Tampa area, because the Tampa area, from a freight rail perspective, is so very much important to us. We've been just a little bit of information on CSX in Florida. We operate we have approximately 3,000 employees. Obviously, we're headquartered in Jacksonville. We operate about 2,400 track miles. And of course, that runs obviously from the Jacksonville area down here, where we have an awful lot of miles in the Tampa area, across the peninsula down to the eastern coast and down into the Miami area. And of course, we also operate are involved in 2 commuter operations, that being Tri-Rail in Miami, and of course, Sunrail that runs through the Orlando area. And so, and I make that point, and I thought the written comments that were just read were very appropriate. Virginia is also a state that I'm involved in, and VRA has been a very successful commuter program and partnership with CSX. But of course, it took a while for Virginia to get to that point. And the reason is we had to have capacity to move our freight. And once Virginia was able to ensure that capacity, which was mentioned in that email, that's when things started to really operate well. And we just came just here in the last 6 months with a major deal that we struck and sold a portion of our railroad to Virginia for them to expand that operation further into the DC area. As a matter of fact, I was in Washington on Tuesday and we rode right by it and talked about where the new line is going to be. So I mentioned that to say that CSX does work with commuter and passenger rail partners. We have a demonstrated history of that, not only Tri-Rail and VRE, but Mark in Maryland and some of the operations that we run up in the Northeast. Amtrak also rides on us a fairly good amount. And something else you might have read in the news lately is we've been discussing Amtrak reinstating their service from New Orleans to Mobile, which ultimately might run even back into Florida. Now we are kind of, I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but we're kind of at war with Amtrak right now over that service. And the main reason is we don't believe there is capacity for what Amtrak wants to do versus the service that we provide to our Gulf Coast customers, which is also a very important line because New Orleans is where we connect with the Western railroads. So that's where we're moving freight to the west along the Memphis and Chicago area, but also where freight is coming from the west to the east. We have not said, nor are we against that service being reinstated. We just want it done correctly. We want it done with the proper infrastructure put in place. And I think that's one message that I'd like to leave with this group today is that part of the reason I wanted to be here, of course, obviously David had invited me and we've been trying to set this up for a while, but is just to give you an update, kind of bringing a little bit closer into Tampa and what's going on here. So like I said, 7 years is a long time since the last time a presentation was made. 4 CEOs is a long time. So we've gone through several different administrations right now. But one thing that has been consistent, has continued to happen, is the growth of the port of the growth of the port of Tampa and the fact that we are growing with it. And as a matter of fact, last week we had what we call a major sales blitz occur in Tampa, because we do see growth from a freight standpoint in this area. So we had about a dozen representatives from CSX Industrial Development down meeting with customers, meeting with also the future customers to talk about that. And of course, just a prime example is the fact that there's about 6,000 acres of land that we're working with the port to try to identify new shippers to come in. We see that the Tampa port has been growing. Obviously, what's going on with the canal, it's a very close port to that. So we see that will be a point where we can have growth. One of the things that we're trying to do in Florida is grow the business, because we move so many trains into the state, but there's not a lot of a ton of product coming out of the state. Now, yes, we built the intermodal facility in Winter Haven, and that continues to operate. We bring also a lot of chemical minerals out of this area in the Bone Valley, and of course the juice train that continues to run and be very successful. But we see the opportunity as growth continues to happen for more of that to occur. Speeches that I've made over the years have predicted, it might actually be true now, but I'm not 100%, but that the growth of Georgia and Florida, the populations of Georgia and Florida, is going to exceed the populations of New York and New Jersey here at some point in time, very close. People continue to move to Georgia. They continue to move to Florida. I don't think I need to tell you guys that. And they continue to move to this great area. And for the record, I will say this for the record, if I was ever told I had to move to Florida, this is the area I would want to come to, actually. The Tampa, Sarasota, St. Pete area. I love this area. It's beautiful. But with that, they are going to have to use the very things that we move. So I spoke with the head of Kia Motors in Georgia. Kia has a major plant in West Point, the western part of Georgia. And he told me that the reason he was calling me is they needed more rail cars, more auto racks to bring cars into the Florida area. And I said, okay, I mean, we'll try to work on that. One of the reasons is that he told me that there were about 350,000 automobiles that were lost during the hurricane. So, and that was judged just by the fact that I couldn't get a rental car when I was coming down to Tampa. But the point is, there's going to be a lot of growth coming. I remember a hurricane back in the mid 2000s when Governor Bush actually called me, and you don't get many calls from a governor when you're in my position, not directly, and said, we need chlorine to the city of Tampa, and we need it now because they're running out of clean drinking water. So the things that we provide in this area are very important. Now, again, that does not mean that the answer, I did not come down here to say the answer is hell no. That's not true. But what we need to have is this. We need to have a plan. We need to have a plan from the Hillsborough area of what you're looking to do. I've heard over time, I've heard an awful lot of comments. I have a really good relationship with Mayor Castor. Like her, I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. And she and I have talked some as well. Some good, some bad. When we shut down 20 crossings to do work and didn't tell anybody, that was not a good phone call. But we have had some good phone calls actually in the past. But what we need is a plan, something that we can comment on. So it would be premature for me to sit here and tell you today, yes, the Brookville sub is great, or no, the Clearwater sub is not good, or the Old Port area is bad. We just don't know. We need to hear from you as much as you need to hear from us on what you're looking to do. Now, there are 4 pillars that we talk about when it comes to passenger rail. 4 things that basically CSX has to be comfortable with before we want to even sit down. And the reason we did this was there are a lot of areas that are interested in passenger rail because growth is happening, especially in the Southeast, everywhere. And what's a little bit different about the Southeast rail as opposed to the Northern rail is most of the South is single track. So a lot of what you have up in the North is double track. It's just the way the railroad was built back in the day, which makes it a little bit more challenging for commuter rail to exist. Tri-rail, when I first started with CSX, Tri-rail was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. Well, then they added an extra track. They included some capacity, and we were able to move those freight trains. But there are 4 things. Number 1, it has to be safe. It's just inherent that when you mix commuter trains with freight trains, something bad could happen. And we want to be assured that not only the freight trains, but obviously the passengers that are in the passenger trains are safe. So safety is number 1. Number 2, we want to ensure capacity. And again, that email that you read mentioned that. And that's what makes VRE, I think, successful. That's what has helped with Tri-rail is we have to be assured that the freight that we're moving, the growth that we're talking about, we're going to be able to move it. People invest in our company because of the freight that we move, not because of the passengers that we move. So we want to make sure that we have capacity. Number 3, we want to be assured that there is funding available. And I know that's been a big conversation here this morning, but we do want to make sure because there's a lot of time that goes into planning and engineering and studies. We want to make sure that there's funding available, that the entity that is approaching us is with that. And then number 4, and this was taken care of during the battles over Sunrail, is we want to make sure we are indemnified. And so indemnity back in the mid 2000s was a major deal. And I basically lived in Tallahassee while we tried to get that bill passed, which we weren't successful the first time around, but we were successful the next time around, which is basically how Sunrail came to be. The Florida legislature did work to include language that ensured that CSX was indemnified. And basically what that means is that so you've got passenger rail here and freight rail is running on that line, and there's an accident on the freight rail, and it's CSX's fault because of a freight train. Obviously, we're responsible for that. But if there's a passenger train running on that line, and there's something happened to that passenger train, we want to make sure that, assuming it's not our fault, that we don't come into some sort of major lawsuit for the railroad. We get sued on a daily basis, so we want to try to minimize those. So those are really the 4 main things that I would suggest to this board and to the other entities here in the area that you have consideration and are ready to address, then come to us. And then we'll be happy to sit down. Now, I will tell you, this area is growing. And what our folks do say right now is it would be tough for something like a passenger rail to happen, even on some of those lines that we had talked about several years ago, because we do see industrial opportunities in those areas. However, we don't want to sit here and shut the door completely, because I've heard the comments that have been made. I live in Atlanta. I know what traffic is like, and we do feel like we have a responsibility to at least have that conversation. Now, our response sometimes might not be what you want to hear, but definitely we think we can have a conversation. So with that, David and Director, we're happy to try to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I know there's going to be a lot of questions. And Commissioner Overman, then Commissioner Long, Commissioner Flowers, and then whoever's next after that. So it's Overman, Long, Flowers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that.
And can you identify what county you're from when you
Okay.
speak?
I'm Commissioner Kimberly Overman. I am the chair of the Hillsborough County Board, but I represent HART and my position to TBARTA, just for your knowledge.
And HART is the
I'm sorry, HART is our local transit agency for Hillsborough County. Thank you very much for being here. It's really nice to see you here. I had spent many years talking with Bob O'Malley. He actually came to one of my transportation discussions just to try and move forward when so many in our community are very interested in developing some type of passenger rail solution for our area. Hillsborough County is huge, 1,000 square miles, and it intersects with all of our partners, which is why we were so interested in having the conversation. I have spent many times looking at the footprint that you have within Hillsborough County, after moving here from DC. And the Metro opened the year I graduated from high school, and that wasn't yesterday. That being said,
You graduated from high school when you were 5, no doubt.
Thank you. But that being said, I've always been very much, from the day I got here in '84, curious about how we couldn't figure this out. And yet we're still here. But I also do realize there is opportunity. And as we heard earlier, there's opportunity from Andrew Morris, who wrote in as a public comment earlier, that there is an opportunity to find partnership. We just have to actually get there. And there has to be momentum across all of us to have that dialogue. And the policymakers need to understand that dialogue. And I think that we can move forward on some of these. And I look forward to it as the chair of the TMA for this area. Part of the reason on a regional basis, we asked to have a study done to do the planning, to explore where there's an opportunity. But what we got back from the state was, you guys weren't interested in talking. So I would love to have a more working relationship in that planning process, so that there's not a misunderstanding or an opportunity to fail. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
In moving forward, because clearly, as you've said, and we've experienced it to the pain point that is unbearable right now, the amount of growth of people moving to Hillsborough County, to the point where I'm having difficulty helping my people that live there stay there. Right. So I'm very eager in having a conversation, and I'm just trying to discern whether or not, TBARTA is the place to have that conversation based on the status of the organization. So I look forward to working with you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. And one thing I'd like to add to that is, that's been a challenge for me personally, is you have TBARTA, you have HART, you have FDOT, you've got various, I call it, and Atlanta is very much the same way, but I call it the alphabet soup of organizations. Who's in charge is one of our questions. Now, I will tell you that we have a wonderful working relationship with FDOT, and FDOT has the sophistication because FDOT's been involved in this. They've been there, done that, and especially with, you look at Sunrail and Tri-Rail. And we got to talk about that. Well, it's not you. I got to talk about the central office. But in terms of studies being done and things like that, I would suggest, and this is Craig's opinion, but that FDOT would be the go-to place in terms of doing those studies that have to be done, because it takes, I mean, I've been involved in those studies and it takes a while and it's not cheap. But it's going to be very critical to getting the right people to conduct that study when you do get to that point.
Commissioner Long.
Mr. Camuso, I find your remarks absolutely refreshing because I have been in the legislature when we had the first iteration of TBARTA. My name is Janet Long. I am representing Pinellas County citizens on this board, and I have been a stalwart supporter of TBARTA in terms of the vision that I had for what it would end up doing. And I want you to know from my perspective that our Secretary Gwynn and Ming Gao have been absolute saints. And I say that with great respect for the way in which they have helped try to lift TBARTA up. My question to you as it relates to CSX, because I was in the legislature when we actually passed that bill. And you know what happened after that.
Right.
But the bottom line was there was much consternation, again, in my caucus about your tracks and the way they had been maintained. And while I listened very carefully to your comments about how your leadership within the organization has changed dramatically over the last decade, I would like to know what the condition of your tracks are, number one, and who maintains them?
Sure. So we are, I'll answer the second part first. So we have our own maintenance of way department. So our track engineers. So the tracks that are owned, that they are owned by CSX. So we are putting the money back into. As a matter of fact, the railroad industry is actually the most capital intensive industry in the nation. About 19 cents out of every dollar we make goes directly back into the tracks. And I wanted to look if I could see this. So our capital investment in Florida is over $104 million. So we spend a lot of money maintaining those tracks. So the conditions of the tracks are good. Overall, now if there's a specific area, I'd be happy to look at that and talk to you about that. But the tracks are inspected on a routine basis. Obviously, especially the ones that, we're running a lot of trains, about 25 trains run a day through the Tampa area, by the way. So we do have routine inspections on those. And I referenced the conversation I had with Mayor Castor. What had happened is we had gone in and did our annual grade crossing maintenance program, and we just forgot to tell everybody we were going to close the grade crossings. It was awful. I was getting phone calls all over the place, and it was kind of funny because Mayor Castor called me and she goes, "Hey, Craig, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing great." I was sitting outside a Mexican restaurant. She goes, "What the hell is going on?" And she goes, "My phone's ringing off the hook. You guys have shut down the city." So sometimes we don't do a good job of going back and forth. We're working on getting better at that. But I feel very confident in the conditions of the tracks. They're maintained with FRA standards. They are inspected on a routine basis. But if there is an area that you have some concern, I'd be happy to get word out and have somebody come out and take a look at that.
Well, if I may have a couple follow-ups, Madam Chair. Well, I was concerned about them just because I am remembering the conversations that we had back in the day about how ill-maintained the tracks were. And my concern also, because I do represent the citizens and a county, is your indemnification policy. So that means that given that let's pretend we moved forward and we're on our way to building this magnificent system. Am I correct in assuming that our counties and our government entities would be totally responsible for any accidents that happen with regard to the train, the tracks, or the?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. And I think going back to what I'd mentioned on that indemnification was, if it's the fault of the railroad, then the railroad's held responsible. If what we want to avoid is, I'm going to throw something out here. the wheel on the passenger train breaks through no fault of the railroad of CSX, the wheel breaks and there's, a tragedy that occurs. We don't believe we should be held liable for that. So that's what the indemnification is. It's that if it's the railroad's fault, then obviously the railroad accepts that responsibility. But if there's something that happens that is deemed not the fault of the railroad, then that's where the indemnification comes in. So we're not looking to shrink away from our responsibilities. Now,
Wait, one moment. Did you say if the wheel on the train falls
I
off?
said that as an example. I was trying to
The
think of.
wheel on the train, that's your train.
No, if it was a
If it's the passenger train.
passenger train,
Yeah.
passenger train.
Well, that's what I took you.
If it's something we purchased, if it was our train.
Yeah, if I wasn't clear. I
We use
apologize.
their tracks, that's all.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
gotcha.
Right.
Okay, well, my next question then is, as it relates to your freight, does the passenger train run on the same rails as the freight train? It does, correct?
It can, again, there's no plan here, but yes. And then can I anticipate your next question? The next question would be, what happens on the track there? So that it has standards. You have different standards, obviously, for tracks that carry freight versus tracks that carry passengers. They're different standards. So the track would be upgraded to include passenger rail.
So, Madam Chair, I have two more questions, if I may.
And I guess I need an explanation of what that means, but go ahead.
Okay, well, so you said you're from Atlanta and you're very familiar with the traffic in and around Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I am assuming that you know that your MPO that represents Atlanta is one MPO that represents, I believe it's 25 different counties.
If you're talking about the Atlanta Regional Commission, yes.
Yeah, that. Do you not agree, and I know this is your opinion, but do you not agree that that is one of the reasons why you have the successes that you do today?
Yes, I do. And I see.
Specific about the soup, the alphabet
Right,
soup.
right. And I'll tell you, I've used the alphabet soup analogy in it with Atlanta as well. But ARC, and you still have a lot of different entities in Atlanta.
Well,
ARC though does kind of bring a lot of folks together.
brings it all together,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now, my last question is it true that CSX has no interest in leasing those tracks?
That's kind of a case by case basis. Right now, the answer would be no, we're not interested. And the reason is because we think the freight growth is there. But it would also be, we've gone back and forth. I mean, literally over the last 5 years, we were in a sell everything mode. Then we were in I'm really not being facetious here. We were in a sell everything mode. Then we were in a buy everything mode. I mean, we literally flip flopped. And now we were in we're in a growth mode. So let's see where we are right now and continue to try to grow the business. So leasing, I don't believe is something that we're at this moment we're interested in. But again, we'd have to see a plan before we would really evaluate
One
that.
quick little teeny bitty question. Are you working on any new and lighter type of type of passenger rail?
We're not, no, ma'am.
Okay.
They don't do any passenger rail.
Right.
No, but I mean, if you were to do, okay, never mind.
Yeah, I think it would be another entity.
Commissioner Flowers is next, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask one quick question,
ahead,
which
go
could
ahead.
inform some of your questions. You mentioned the state of Virginia's.
DRE.
Does the state of Virginia participate in that, or is it just the regions?
State is very active. As a matter of fact, when we talk about really sophisticated DOTs, obviously I point to three: FDOT, North Carolina DOT, and Virginia DOT, Virginia Rail. Their legislators appropriated funds. They are very active in pursuing federal grants. and their locals are involved as well. But we deal with, as a matter of fact, they literally were in Jacksonville just last week. We work with the VR. I'm looking at you because you remembered is it VRPA? I'm getting my acronyms confused. Virginia Rail Passenger Authority.
DRPT.
DRPT. Thank you. Yeah.
So, do they own the lines or do they lease them from you there?
Wow, that is a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I can get back to you on
That's
that.
important for us.
Yeah, I can get back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Flowers. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for coming. I probably like some others up here, but I'm a native of St. Petersburg, Florida, and the rail was the major way to move lumber in South St. Petersburg, particularly in what is now Tropicana Field, but was the heart of a community at one point. So the rail was always very important to us for moving goods and services from this area up the East Coast. But over time, things happen, growth and development, expansion and whatnot. But part of that, plus the circus used to come in on the rails,
yeah.
You know, and we would get a chance to go down there. But part of what has occurred with some of those rail lines is that they have essentially been built over. Case in point is Gibbs High School. I served on the Pinellas County School Board, and a large portion of the rail that would run really east and west from downtown, would have been downtown St. Petersburg, moving west, has been covered, has been built over because the high school, the baseball field right now is on the back of the tracks. And then other portions of the CSX tracks are the trail, the Pinellas Trail. And so was there, because I served, but I don't recall us ever purchasing or leasing those tracks from you guys. Well, I may be telling on somebody. when we built and expanded Gibbs High School, or even running the trail along that goes actually by my house, and then takes a swift right turn and then goes up through the Bay Pines area, Largo, Clearwater, etc.
Don't forget Seminole.
Seminole. And so that's been covered up with asphalt because now it's the trail.
Right.
So do you know where you are with that? Because in looking at moving persons from say downtown St. Pete and going on up that way, that would be a great possibility to utilize those rails.
Are you talking about an expanded trail or passenger rail?
I'm talking about passenger.
Passenger rail, okay.
But I'm asking, were those rails sold or leased? Because I don't recall taking an action when I served on the school board that we purchased them from you or that we bought them from you. And when I served on city council in St. Petersburg, when the trails were up and coming, again, I do not recall an action item where we purchased those lines from you guys, especially through Fairfield Avenue, going all the way to moving through 22nd Street, crossing 22nd Street, going behind the old railroad station, which is now the St. Pete Clay Company. Some of the rails are exposed, some are covered up, but I don't recall an action where we either purchased or leased those from you, but there is certainly activity on them.
Right. I don't know the answer to that. I can find that out. How long ago was when all that is out? It sounds like it's been a few years, right?
It has been.
Yeah.
Decades.
It has been.
Decades. Okay.
Yeah.
So that came out before
So
me.
we may have just taken liberty. I don't know.
It could.
Somebody.
What's been interesting is, I mean, in the 20 years that I've been here, we are constantly changing policy to fit, where we're going as a company. We've had issues in other cities, other states, where we have sold property to various states. One is the Silver Comet Trail in Atlanta, and we'd give anything to have that corridor back. So the thing that, our number one asset is our property. And I can tell you that once we get rid of it, we're not getting it back. So you see a lot of trails that actually legally say, if the railroad ever needs this to, again, for rail purposes, we can take it back. Well, we're not taking back a trail that has 50,000 people on it weekly, right? So, I mean, we could legally, I call it I call it legal philosophy versus political reality, is we're not going to get those back, which is kind of the reason why we are tough to deal with when it comes to our property, because we know we're not getting it back. And so we're gonna be very careful. Now, this area, which probably doesn't have any that you're referring to, does not have any customers on it right now. There are no freight customers.
Not anymore.
So-
It used to be very active.
Right, so-
Let me tell you, it's called the Orange Belt line. It came through the front of 5 miles of our ranch. Was on that line. I'm looking here, it was purchased.
Okay.
And we have the abandoned corridor in our county, which we're putting a trail on top of it. Although we've sold some of the rail abandoned corridor was sold on the courthouse steps. So we have a few blocks that we have to do. But I will tell you, CSX does own little parcels of land in my district in people's backyards that one day, not here, but I'd love to talk to you about how we can resolve that problem.
Yeah, because, a lot of those you're right, because we've sold things over the years. I mean, we've been in existence for nearly 200 years. I mean, if you've ever played Monopoly, and you've owned the B&O Railroad in Monopoly, what's left of the B&O Railroad is operated by CSX now. So, I mean, we go back a long, long time, and there are little properties that sometimes that are on tax records that we don't realize they're not operating property and things like that.
Yeah.
We certainly have and I can put you in touch with the right person to
Yeah, we
help
should
us clear
get that
that up.
resolved.
Probably through escheatment to retrieve those pieces.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. Holton, and please identify who
Yes.
you are.
Jim Holton, I'm a gubernatorial appointee, so I kind of owe my allegiance to the state and the community as a whole rather than one specific constituency. And I actually was chair of the Transportation Commission when you guys negotiated the Sunrail deal and worked with Jeb and Denver Stutler and others that
Right. Yeah.
saw that get done, and compliments to a deal well done. It was a win-win both for the state of Florida and for CSX. And thank you for all the great work you do, especially in the freight area in this state. What I'm hearing today is there are a lot of great opportunities, in the Tampa Bay region and so forth. Again, this board, and I need to remind everyone, has some statutory prohibitions about directly entering into agreements with railroads. And that was put in as so-called Brandeis Compromise when the legislation was done, because that senator specifically did not want this agency to negotiate and contract with rail. So the real proper venue, in my opinion, is a great DOT, the state of Florida, and probably right now, Hillsborough County or the city of Tampa, because you're the most actively involved and the ones that will benefit the most from that. Is that happens first, Pinellas County, Pasco County, Hernando County, others can benefit by that. But that's where the focus should really be right now in doing that. And that's what I would encourage everyone to realize as we go through these hypothetical discussions. This is about the state, it's about Hillsborough County right now. And then from there on, we can talk about other opportunities. But DOT is really the best equipped to deal with this complex issue and negotiate something if it's to be had.
Yes, sir. And I agree. And one of the main reasons is if with all due respect, when we talk to FDOT, we're not starting over. FDOT works with us. I mean, we talk with FDOT and the various districts on a daily basis. And especially with the central office. So that's one of the main issues.
Commissioner Kemp has her hand up, and then we'll go to Ming, then to me, then to Commissioner Overman, then to Mayor Welch. I gotta write that down. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating, and I'm so.
Can you introduce
me?
So he knows who's he's speaking to?
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm Pat Kemp, and I'm a Hillsborough County Commissioner and Chair of the Heart Board in Hillsborough, and been involved in this discussion for a long time. And I'm glad to hear an update on Bob O'Malley, because he's the first person that I really had longer discussions with many years ago when he was with CSX. So I guess it's back again. And congratulations too on your good numbers today. The financial update that we've had and the freight performance, which I think is extraordinarily important for moving freight, for moving our goods through the country. And, I've always thought rail made the most sense in terms of how we use trucking and everything else for much of the shipping we do. But I have been extraordinarily interested for years in the capacity to do passenger, as was mentioned here, San Diego, but of course, Tri-Rail, Sunrail. I watched the development of Sunrail very, very closely. I've been on the former CSX tracks, and you can kind of tell them. In St. Louis, in Denver, in Maryland, when just going to the stadium there from DC into Baltimore. And so I'm familiar with those operations, and I heard everything you said that makes total sense to me about what you want to understand or know or be talking about: safety, capacity, funding, and indemnification. As a lawyer, I've always heard that, and understand that. But I'm just thank you for coming. And this discussion, I think, can bear a lot of fruit. And I'm glad to have the opening again. There was palpable. In fact, I think it's the only time I've watched the Times at the time when they reported it said the palpable excitement in the room back in, I guess you said 2015. I'd even thought in my mind it was 2013, but it probably was 2015. I was in that room and there was like no air to breathe. It was so packed, and people were practically jumping out of their chairs literally to talk about how we could do some kind of passenger rail on the CSX tracks. They come all around me where I live in Tampa. And I know one time when I went to a TBARTA meeting in Brooksville, I just practically followed the tracks the whole way. And when I arrived there, I crossed over them to get to the building again. So I know that I have watched the maps and look forward to further conversations, because I think that there's great opportunity here for further discussion, and appreciate you coming forward, and appreciate all what you've told about the history and the opportunity and what CSX is looking at and needs.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next thing, sorry, I'm in the hunt for coffee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, Craig. Thanks for coming down. I'm glad you're down here so everybody can pepper you with questions. I know.
Georgia has an off week. I'm okay.
I know we had talked quite a few times, and I'm just glad that you can convey the message clearly to everyone here in the region. I just want to make sure that the state's position is clear here. We are in support of any passenger rail effort, as long as their funding available. As you mentioned, the 4 pillars for CSX. I think that is important. I think we talked about the 2015 presentation that Bob made. That got lots of people excited. But we have communicated, and business strategy had changed at CSX, and I think we all need to respect that. The state is actively developing a statewide rail plan, which includes passenger rail, and we always look for opportunity to partner with the locals. But again, as you mentioned, they need to be planned, they need to be funding in place, need to be safe, and also need to be indemnified. And I think those are very important things for us to consider moving forward. So I just want to make sure that, the state's position is clear here. We are a good partner with CSX, and we like to partner with the locals, and we need to have a plan to present to CSX instead of just coming to you and say, hey, I want to buy your rail line.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I mean, interrupt, but I don't want to do the Mutual Admiration Society, but it is worth mentioning that your FDOT district secretary are fantastic.
Yeah, we love them.
Yep.
Okay, so now it's me, and then we're gonna go to Mayor Welch and then back to Commissioner Overman. I have a couple questions, and I am the chair of the Pasco County Commission, and your rail line goes right through us, through the new campus that Moffett has purchased, 760 acres of world-class life science manufacturing, and it's going to be just an amazing campus. And then 200 acres below it, a Swiss company coming, also internationally known. And we expect a lot of activity there, a lot of jobs. The line, I don't know what's the name of that corridor? The Brooksville?
Brooksville.
So, I think that corridor is a really interesting corridor for passenger rail in the area. And I can tell you, I've lived in Pasco County for 31 years now, and I have never been stopped by your train. So I'm
You're the only one.
you have a very busy corridor on the other side. The last story I remember on that one, is that 9? Do you call it? The rail line that goes, your freight, I think, comes off at the port, goes to Polk County, and then comes back and goes up through my county,
Okay.
I believe. I remember when that train, your conductors reached their limit and they stopped. They got off the train right in the middle of our little Dade City, stopped all the traffic. There was no way to get around it. And the way it was situated, you could not get from one side to the other.
Right.
And it was an interesting challenge. It was I don't live out there, so it didn't bother me. But what I recall hearing in the past is that for now, and this is kind of for Commissioner Holcomb, because he's soon to be up in our legislature, is that if we don't own the line, we don't get any state money. Now, is that true? Or is that something that can change? But that DOT can't participate in this unless they own the line. And have we not heard that here? Yeah, so where is that?
Am I on?
You're on. Yeah.
You were one.
Okay, sorry. The answer is no, it doesn't mean that DOT will not participate. I think what we're looking at is a feasible plan that we have local funding in the service, because we will look into lease option. I think Craig and I had that conversation as well. When we first talked, even though CSX may not be interested in selling it now, but they are interested in having discussion on leasing, possible leasing, options on the table. But at the end of the day, we need to have a plan in place, not only funding the capital side of things, but also long-term operation. And I think that is very important to CSX as well, because you put all those investment in there, make sure you have a long-term funding commitment for operating. I mean, that is something we had talked about over and over again. Without that, it's difficult for us to go to Tallahassee and ask for funding. And, for the district to support it, we also need to see, commitments from the locals. And, over and over again, this board talked about, how can we get together to fund something? And I think that's what it's about.
Yep. Okay. And I just want to tell my constituents, I'm just joking about the Dade City. Okay. So that is interesting, because I think that's something different. Somewhat that I recall hearing in the past was that if we didn't own it, the state couldn't participate. Okay. So I'm going to go to Mayor Welch and then Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have the capability to pull up a website, to pull up csx.com? I think it's helpful to see the map if we can.
I'm looking at the map.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too. So.
Yeah. And
so I have some questions
I
on
just
that.
Googled it.
If we can pull it
up
up
here.
Yeah, I'll defer.
Let me see if I can find it. So
Yeah,
CSX.com.
Yeah, the system map.
And
you get then you can go. I did CSX Tampa Bay, and I got the the map of Tampa Bay.
to where, can you help me find what they're looking for, maybe?
Yes, Mr. Chris Chad.
I can help. If you want to go to Chair,
Yes.
if you want to go to the next board member, I can wait.
Okay, Commissioner Overman. And I could say, I don't have his.
The good news is I'm actually glad we're having this conversation, and I'm glad we're at CSX is here and representing that conversation. And I'm really glad that he went over the very 4 steps that are his core issues. Safety, capacity, funding, and indemnity. And if we could, given that the state is in the process of updating its state rail plan, which honestly would impact your capacity.
Yep, and we're
to
involved in that as well.
Your primary responsibility and market is obviously freight, right? But I found it when we were looking at our state transportation plan, that freight wasn't even mentioned. So I'm like, oh, our freight plan. Rail wasn't even mentioned. It was really talking about the roads. So for a person who goes, oh, great, we're finally updating the rail plan. But then I look at a freight plan and it doesn't mention rail. I'm like, okay, are we having the same conversation about how we move freight and people around? So maybe I missed the memo, but when I looked at the freight plan, but clearly there's an opportunity.
Right.
Okay, when the state finishes or gets further along in its state rail plan update and interfaces that with the state freight plan, it would help give our local DOTs, our local district, good guidance on what's possible. Because if safety is your primary first issue,
Right.
then capacity is your second. We can't even get to the funding conversation.
Right.
Because we don't know what you're going to need. What I have continually said, it's my understanding there wasn't a significant amount. And obviously, if we've got lines that were trailed over, we have dead end lines in our region that have possible lack of capacity on CSX part or capacity need, that we could share that right away in some way, shape or form, depending on what that looks like. And that would make sense for the plan that is necessary. For your localities, on the other hand, we reverse that. We don't necessarily have it in the same order of which you provided. Yes, we need safety. We don't have safety in any part of our transportation systems now. So yes, we need that. Capacity is becoming such an issue that's why people are really seriously going, how can we take advantage of moving a lot of people rather rapidly on a line where the right of way might go away if we don't find a way to have that conversation. Right. And so we recognize there's a conflict with our capacity issues and your capacity issues as an agency. Indemnity, I think, can be worked through. I get sued every day as a county commissioner.
Right.
I mean, every day I get served with something because somebody thinks that somebody's responsible for something that happened.
Only once since I've been through the company, I was told, do not drive through the state of Alabama. You will be subpoenaed. A true story. We were trying to get to Destin. We had to go a different direction. That's a true story.
And that's challenging. Clearly, Hillsborough is challenged with its own funding of its street lights, much less, rails. So, and our opponents are actually killing our street light funding and calling it a rail tax that's supposed to be a bad thing. So I think there's opportunity for having conversations, recognizing that the planning does need to be done. And clearly the state would be the catalyst for acting as the planning and the funding agent. But given transportation planning on transit, it does require local, state and federal funding, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Whether it's freight or.
I think you have to buy. I mean, my experience is you have to have buy-in from everyone. And if you look at what we were talking about with, commitment from the locals and being able to maintain that going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to speak out of line, but I think Sunrail that's part of the reason why Sunrail's hasn't been handed over to the local governments yet, because I think there's an issue with being able to maintain the funding
Right.
that's necessary. So it's, I mean, you've got your upfront, you have your preliminary engineering or your study cost, then you have your building cost, and then you have your operating cost, when it comes to passenger rail. So it's something that needs to be thought of. I mean, several steps ahead.
And then to Director Holton's conversation and his point about how Tampa Hillsborough has sort of the greatest stake in the game, largely because of the port, because we recognize your priority in terms of freight. So I think there is an opportunity, but I do believe that our local DOT or district's DOT, has to take the committed lead with our commitment to moving forward. The TMA had asked TBARTA just to study the right of way, not necessarily do the whole plan, in my opinion. Let's say what I thought we asked for, but we were looking at what, if we look at the right of way and we talk with you about capacity, safety, what's possible, then we could actually have a conversation about funding, whether it be through whoever the agency is that actually operates what could be possible. But that's down the road. And it's down the road for not only you, but it's also for us.
Right.
So I still have a desire to make that happen. I would hope that our DOT can still engage in that as the state rail plan and freight plan comes together, so that we're not in conflict with that. And that gives the local agencies a reason to say, yeah, we want to play, we want to do this. We have to do it because we know we've got a population growth rates in this area that, is going to require it. And we know that. But we also recognize we don't own the right of way. And so we need to figure out a way to operate and to address your first and your last category, your safety and your indemnification. And I think we can get there, but we have to make a commitment to wanting to and find out who our agent is to make it happen. So that's why I was asking what happens with TBARTA. So.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Welch, then I'm going to go to Ming, and then we're going to have to, I think probably stop our conversation with CSX. We're so glad that you're here.
My back's starting.
And then I'm going to go to David, and then we have some presentation. We have a few action items and we have some.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Let me first just join the Ming and Secretary Nguyen Love Fest. They've been great partners over the years, and thank you, Craig, for being here. This has been very informative. I'm Ken Welch, Mayor of St. Pete, and before that, I was a longtime county commissioner. This has been one of the most informative sessions I've sat through.
Amen.
Over the years. So on the issue of planning and the lack of funding, the message I've always received, and I actually pulled up our Pinellas mobility study from 2003. And then we had Greenlight in 2014 that did have a funding source, but it focused on light rail that excluded the CSX corridor. Is because the message we clearly got was CSX was not interested. And so that's why we don't have a plan. That's why we don't have funding to that extent. Although I'm sure y'all talked about Sunrunner, that we did, BRT was part of that discussion. And now we've started the first today.
Congrats.
BRT in the region. And that's a step forward that came out of that process. I have just a basic question. So on your map, if you look at the Pinellas Hillsborough border of Oldsmar and then going down to Clearwater through Pinellas Park and Lelman, how much of that is active for freight?
That's what I'm saying.
So, okay, I see over here, Pinellas Park, you said.
Starting at Oldsmar, which is like.
I got Hillsborough Avenue.
Yeah, so the west part.
Right at the top of the bay.
Can you point to Oldsmar with the?
Oh, I got it.
Person.
I found it. Okay.
Yeah.
The line's going through the name. That's why.
So how much of that is active as you go down to St. Pete?
In terms of number of trains daily, the numbers that I have are for the area. So what I would need to do is get that specific number to you. Yes, sir.
And is it active all the way down to St. Pete to this day for freight?
I don't believe it's entirely active right now. No.
Okay.
They stopped it after they stopped delivering the paper to the Times, remember?
Yeah, they used to deliver those huge rolls on 13th Avenue North.
That's just a slow hanging curve, Commissioner. I'm not going. Thank you. Okay, so none of that is active. And what's the format? You talked about single rail versus multi-rail. What's the format of that track?
That's a single rail track, I believe, that runs down that area. And
So you have the same issues as you had with tri-rail
yes,
initially.
yeah, well, I would assume that would be the case if we got to that point. Yeah.
Okay. And when you talk about passenger rail, are you mainly speaking about commuter rail or higher frequency light rail?
Right. You know, it's funny. I would turn to the expert on this because I always say passenger rail. People refer to commuter rail, intercity rail, high speed rail. I'm talking about just running people on a train. I don't, to be honest with you, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on which one we're talking about. And I do know that they're all different. They're classified differently.
Yeah.
I'm not that smart though. I just think about the people.
I love the transparency because, you know, due to FDOT's partnership, the new Howard Franklin will have the underpinning to support light rail connecting Pinellas to Hillsborough. Our plans have always been focused on high frequency light rail, but I think what they have in South Florida is more commuter rail.
Yeah, you're talking about off on the right of way or next to the track type light rail, right? Different, yeah. Okay.
So I guess from my perspective, as we expand our BRT going forward, I'd love to see CSX because we got the question throughout Greenlight and throughout Pinellas Mobility. Why aren't you using this that connects Clearwater down through, you know, the growing cities of Pinellas Park, Lellman, Seminole to connect you? And so I'd love to see that as an option for us to talk about.
Mayor Welch, could you explain what green light is?
Greenlight Pinellas was our transportation initiative in 2014 that included BRT, light rail, and of course, support for PSTA, which is our main transit agency, almost like the Hillsborough initiative. And hopefully we'll be going back soon for a similar initiative.
And I think going back to what I said earlier, and I don't want to sound crass or anything, but I think it goes back to bring us a plan and then we can talk to you about that. Because I want it'd be premature for me to say, okay, there's nothing here, then maybe we can, and I'd be coming to you for a job, you know, after that. But I do think that it's something that we would have to, we need to see something.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you, man.
But I will look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Now to our transit expert, me.
I'm not the expert, but I just want to make a couple more points. First, to your initial question, Madam Chair, about, you know, if we don't own the track, you know, DOT won't participate. I think the comment we made previously was that if we're not purchasing the track, the state's probably not going to take the lead role in negotiating. It's up to the local to talk to CSX about leasing the track, because we won't be in conversation about leasing. You know, the local want to operate passenger rail.
That's the difficulty for us, I think.
So,
yeah, why would you not be involved?
well, we'll be involved. We're not going to be leading the negotiation, because that leasing is a commitment of the local agency that's running the passenger rail. Because it's different than the Sunrail case, because we were part of the negotiation team with CSX about purchasing the track. Then we were involved in implementing the passenger rail service.
I'll give you I mean, I think that the statute of limitations is over, but I mean, I literally was in the very first meeting that we had with the state. It was our CEO and then Governor Bush. And our CEO said, do you want to buy this line? And the governor said, yes. And our CEO went $1 billion. Because that's the cost. And it ended up being, I think at the end of the day, it was 889 million or something.
So it was a 400 and some million, but
and it wasn't all cash. There was some,
it
wasn't all cash. There was a commitment to bring to what we did was, you know, to talk about the safety issue. We took the trains that run on that line and we moved them over to our, what I call it, the inner line. And that's how, so now there's only there, we still serve a utility company in Orlando. And there are just some windows in which freight operates. And that's kind of how we addressed the safety. But to Ming's point, the state bought that outright.
So,
That's a challenge for us because who's going to be the negotiator? If it's not TBARTA, which we've proven we're not very good at that.
I think for leasing agreement, I think, whichever entity end up wanting to run it, to implement it, need to negotiate. I mean, we will provide any support, any technical support, the local needs will be there. What we're saying that we won't be taking the lead because you're making a lease agreement, you're making commitment from a local point of view. The state does not own that track. The state's not going to go in and purchase the track. It's a leasing agreement. So the local need to take the lead, not the state. We will participate in the service, financially and technically, but it's a local service.
Is that's a policy decision?
No, but I think we had talked about that with our leadership. If we purchase, state would definitely be part of the negotiation, take the lead.
Right. I guess what I'm hearing is the state would not negotiate on behalf of a local authority. That would be up to the local authority because the lease would not be between, I'm getting into stuff I shouldn't be getting into, but it wouldn't be between the state and CSX, it'd be between the state and, a county or a entity or something.
So I think like if Hillsborough County wants to enter into a leasing agreement with CSX to lease the track to run service between USF and downtown, for example, I think the county should take the lead to negotiate with CSX. We will still participate technically and financially. We'll still support it as any transit initiative. The local one wants to implement. What we are saying is that we're not going to be taking the lead or negotiate on behalf of Hillsborough County unless you ask us to. But we won't just come in and say we'll negotiate on your behalf.
Is that Hillsborough County or is that the city of Tampa?
Well, that's really, it could be either. So
yeah, and then but
So the lines that Hillsborough has been looking at are actually two different lines that don't start at the Hillsborough County line. They cross into Pasco. They run, for example, you made mention, and I meant to make the comment, the new Moffitt Center that's being built in Pasco, that Moffitt wants a connection between that location and its Tampa location over by USF. Those are two different lines. And CSX owns both of them, is my understanding. But, partial leasing of partial lines has never been offered as a solution. And I'm curious about the fact that is it because of the funding requires a capital investment versus operating funds and the way those are treated when it comes to the agreement? Because if you're not willing to sell the lines and leasing is available, then coming up with an operating agreement to be able to lease those lines still will require a capital investment of the trains and the resources and the maintenance yard, just as we all do with our transit agency. So there still would be capital investment. It's just the essence of how that leasing agreement is possible if it's a regional project, when our DOT has to be the negotiating agent or has to be the agent of working up the plan. You want somebody to be part of the plan, correct? Who needs to be the plan? The state. But if the state isn't agreeing to actually, any kind of negotiation on a lease basis, on a regional basis, why, how do we ever expect to move forward? That's what we need to.
Just a point of order, please. From my opinion, this is a board and boards are supposed to work on policy, and we are getting way in the weeds with this conversation. I would like to make a recommendation that we turn this conversation over to our MPOs, which is where it belongs, that they work together to bring to us if we're going to still be here in another month, they bring to us a recommendation, because this is not our job. This is the job of our one regional MPO and a discussion with FDOT. That is the only way we're going to get it done. That's the only way we're going to satisfy our citizens. And again, this is not our job. So I move we stop this conversation, we continue with our agenda and either reject or deny my motion to turn it over to our MPO.
Are you making that motion right now?
Yes.
To turn it over to MPO or to table the discussion? Let's
I
end the
want
discussion with
some
CSX.
direction
Yeah.
about where this conversation belongs. It does
Agreed.
not belong at our board. And I don't believe it belongs at TMA because they have no authority. They are all volunteers.
Okay, Mr. Holton?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a point of order and in support of that. Again, as I said at the outset, we are statutorily prohibited from doing these negotiations. We're asking an informative question, but we're wasting this gentleman's time going into intellectual issues that are best solved by the state or the MPO or DOT. So.
Did I get to you, Ming? Because I know you answered you made your comments, right?
I just want to, my second point was real quick.
Okay.
We have always focused on freight movement. And you may not see rail emphasis in our state freight plan. We've been working with CSX on freight accommodation. We focus on the hub, make sure trucks can get to those rail hubs and get stuff in and out. And also in Sunrail's case, we spend so much money to accommodate freight movements in order to implement passenger rail. Winter Haven ILC, prime example. We move all the rails out of Orlando and put it in Winter Haven, and that's the state funded ILC. So I just want to comment on that. We do focus on freight movement on rail.
And I just want to say one thing. I'm not sure if I can speak as eloquently as my members here, and then we're going to move on to David.
Yeah, point of order, call the question.
Okay, can you restate your motion? I didn't hear a second, but restate your motion.
My motion is, this is not our job. I would like it to be turned over, the discussion we're having, to our MPO and FDOT and bring a recommendation back. That's my motion.
Okay. Entertain a second.
Second.
All right, any discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
As much as I love my commissioner, so what are we here for? I mean, if we're talking regional transit, I haven't heard anything that we've talked about that have more of an impact than turning this into commuter or passenger rail down the line, given all those hurdles. So I just think if the MPO is a place for this to be, I think it really speaks to the base question of why are we here?
And that's what we're going to get to when we're done talking with CSX.
Okay, so-
And we've been having this discussion this morning.
Can I answer?
You might have missed it. Yeah.
Can I answer his question
Absolutely.
really quickly? You weren't here for the discussion we had at finance and policy.
Mhm.
If we had a recommendation from our leader, who is sitting right here,
Okay.
as to which way to go, we might be in a better position. But we don't have a recommendation from the staff. So hence we are forced to go around this body because look where we are. And this is the same place we've been for the last 5 years.
I'd
Okay.
say 20, but
David.
thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to remind the board that to Commissioner Overman's comment earlier about TMA's request for TBARTA to conduct an assessment of the corridor. We did initiate a procurement. We actually received proposals. We interviewed a consultant just earlier this week. I've not met with Mr. Burns, who oversaw the procurement, about requesting a cost proposal from the consultant yet, but the opportunity to conduct the assessment of the corridor still exists if in fact the board wants to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask the commissioner if he would entertain a friendly amendment, which is to table this discussion now, as opposed to make it.
I would absolutely, yes, this is same old, same old, same old.
Okay, well, I would then make a motion to table the discussion for further discussion.
Okay, and so we take a vote on that tabling, so that's correct, right? All in favor of tabling this discussion for now, signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
I've got to go, but David has my information and so does Ming. So, please let me know and I'll, we can talk. We'll continue the conversation.
Okay.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I'd love to have that contact.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
You have.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay, we'll get it. We'll get it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, because I think Mr. Pierce has to leave, I am gonna, stop on the action items and we'll do them in a few minutes and turn it over to David.
Chair, one quick, you
Yeah.
have I have to leave as well to catch a plane.
Okay,
Can we, you still have a quorum to vote on the action items if I leave?
let me ask.
Yes, you are.
Okay, because I
Okay.
have to
Okay.
leave probably now.
But you may want to listen. So David?
Which part of the agenda do you want to go?
Well, we didn't get to you in the policy and thought maybe, did you want Mr. Pierce to say anything this morning? Or are we gonna wait?
If Mr. Pierce has to leave, then absolutely. We'd like him to address some of the comments that were made earlier.
Can we move? There's just two action
items. All right, we can do that.
leave as well.
All right, well, let's get those. While he's walking up, I would entertain a motion of the August and September board meetings.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Is this something we have to hear or do we just vote on it?
Chris can kind of orient everybody as to what
I'll be
the action
brief.
item is.
1 minute.
Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination by recipients of federal financial assistance on the basis of race, color, national origin, including the denial of meaningful access for limited English proficiency persons. This board approved this plan in 2018. It requires periodic updates. Most notably, it names Ken Bowden as our Title VI officer, requesting that you approve the updates to this Title VI plan.
So, second,
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're done.
come on, Ron.
Just make up.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Just really quick, kind of going back on our discussion from the Finance Committee and from the Policy Committee. After the last meeting, when we did the workshop and we had a board meeting following that, David and I and Cliff, sat down and had discussions about, so what are next steps based upon kind of the direction that we're going? Where can TBARTA go after that? And we had lots of discussions about, potentially going back and opening up the Enabling Act and maybe changing the way we look. We talked about what our mission could potentially look like. And ladies and gentlemen, we kept coming back to two things, by the way. We kept coming back to, TBARTA was handcuffed from the very beginning without a dedicated funding source. So without a dedicated funding source, no matter what you all come up with, it's very difficult to move forward. And I think really where David and Cliff started to land on looking at potentially going back to the legislature and saying, we tried to make this work, we're not sure if we can make it work, is because without state funding, that's one discussion. But we start talking about not having no local funding, which I'm not aware of any local funding, by the way, that was either A, allocated or probably B, you're going to receive during the 22-23 budget cycle from the local governments. That changes the discussion dramatically.
Yes.
So I will tell you this, with or without what you all are talking about, and Jim, I think you're absolutely correct. I believe no matter what you all do, there will be a bill filed in Tallahassee this year to repeal you. So just be prepared for that. I think we need to prepare as a board for that. One thing that made it easier in the past because you all last year did not oppose that. But I think the legislature and members of the delegation, the delegations that we represent, also recognize that local governments were making an investment in this. So it made sense to continue to move forward. Without those local investments, I don't know what the options are from a Tallahassee perspective at this point to really, for them not to repeal you. So just be, as you're all talking about kind of what the future of the organization looks like, because you're absolutely correct. The attorney talked about earlier, there's a couple things that can happen. Number one, somebody can find a bill to outright repeal you, in the Enabling Act. So TBARTA would no longer exist. Option would be able to go back and change that Enabling Act. So that is an option. But I will tell you, even if you change the Enabling Act, it doesn't solve the problem as you don't have any funding and we're not speaking with one voice. Again, a couple of you mentioned, we're about to have Commissioner Holcomb go up and be a House member in Tallahassee. He's been sitting through this and he said it time and time again, we're not speaking with one voice. And that's been one of our biggest challenges in Tallahassee. And I think that will continue to be a challenge is if we don't speak with one voice on the direction that we want to go as an organization. So as you determine kind of what the future is, obviously we will follow the direction that you all give us and we'll go to Tallahassee and do our best to make those things happen. But as of right now, elections are 16, 17 days away. You've got organizational session the end of November. It was probably a special session in December. Committee week started in January, sessions in March. It's upon us. It's right around the corner. And without clear direction from you all on kind of what our future holds, again, with or without us, and I don't know who it is, by the way. So Sonia's probably going to ask me, so who's filing it? I can just tell you, though, members of the delegations are closely watching what we're doing right now as an organization. And I will tell you, I'm confident that a bill would be filed in Tallahassee to repeal this next year with or without the blessing of this board of directors.
And, and as Commissioner Long mentioned this morning, we really can't even talk about CSX here. So we're just spinning our wheels. So, Commissioner Holcomb. Yeah, Commissioner Holcomb.
I agree with what Ron has said. I think back to Mayor Welch's comments at the workshop of the long history, Mr. Holton's comments of where we can and can't be, and Ming his input on that. As Ron stated, we have no state funding. We haven't gotten any state funding, and now local funding is either gone in some respects or definitely in question. So I know I sit here as a commissioner, but I'm leaving if the voters will have me in Hernando and Pasco as a representative. And I know I'm going to get this question many times in Tallahassee, and I can't defend the continuation of this board at this point in time. I've sat here for, you said a year, so I'm here longer than you. So I don't know, a year and a half. So in all fairness, Hillsborough has told TBARTA to go pound sand. So without Hillsborough, and I see them as a spine of regional transit, we don't have regional transit from that respect. So I applaud the work in Pinellas that you guys are doing with your recent Sunrunner and the other projects that you're looking at, and you're working with Pasco on some other things. From the Hernando standpoint, whether it's Pasco widening a road at 52, adding a road at Ridge Road and other things, that all helps the commuters in Hernando County. I recognize that. And I used to commute to McDill. So whether it was full-time or a part-time basis, so better access to McDill, better access to downtown Tampa, that all helps the Hernando County citizens and the Pasco citizens. So I want that, but I don't see the pathway for this board. And like I said, I know I'll get that question, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have a problem filing that bill at this point in time.
Okay, so any questions for Ron? Because I know Ron has to leave.
Thank you.
I wish I had better news for you. I apologize.
No, I think many of us think we're there, so.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members.
We've tried. Thank you very much, Ron.
If I could just offer a suggestion, I know there are a lot of questions about the repeal and the attorney raised some good questions earlier as well. I asked the opportunity to come back in January with some recommendations on what we need to do in order to start unwinding the agency and what happens with some of our assets and grant funds that are still left available and those sorts of things.
So you, what about the November meeting? Is that? No?
Probably be better in January, just to
Okay,
give some time to meet with all of our stakeholders and get some of these questions answered.
okay. Board members, you good with that? Commissioner, Mr. Holton?
I think that's fine, but I would urge staff to do this with all dispatch, because I think at this point, if there's a consensus here that we are going to unwind and dissolve, let's don't spend any more of the taxpayers' money doing that. Let's just do it. I think we owe that to the state of Florida and to the people of Tampa Bay. And then we can refocus those dollars on productive efforts to get projects done. That's what the people want, not the continuation of a board that is essentially not done its job.
Madam Chair,
Yep.
do we need to give clear direction to staff at this point with a motion? Or are we just gonna address that further at another meeting? I don't know, Mr. Green, or you wanna?
Well, I'm thinking that if they need till January, I'm okay.
Okay.
It's over the Christmas holiday. To come to us with an action plan in January.
Okay.
All right,
So can I for clarification? Yeah. Some of us that sit on boards are trying to put our funding and our budgets in, you know, I mean, are we good with funding the current folks at TBARTA? I hear we are, right?
I thought what I presented in the finance report was that we were good through the balance of 2020.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
and in Pasco County, what we did as far as our funding for TBARTA was we held it until and said we'd make a decision in January. So my guess is we'll, after David's report, we'll see where we are in Pasco. So, okay.
Well, Pinello said that we would make a decision after this meeting today based on what was decided today.
And then, we'll probably all see the writing on the wall.
Well, we have Hillsborough and.
Well, Hillsborough and Champ already said no, so.
They were the first ones to say that.
That's not even.
Okay, so we have the chairman's report. Do you want to give that, or do you want to go into a presentation? Because what do you want to do?
We can do a presentation. Do you want to recognize Mr. Roberts for the CAC report real
Sure.
quick?
Do you want to give a really fast report and we can at least get one of these presentations? We're going to start losing people. Thank you, Ron.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Bill Roberts. I chair your Citizens Advisory Committee. I will be as brief as possible after this very interesting morning discussion. The CAC met this month. We held had a report on the Clearwater Beach Gondola study, which is very interesting. We got an update on that. The CAC also has passed a resolution that I believe is in your packets. I came prepared to read that resolution into the record, but in the interest of time, I will ask you to review it at your leisure. But I would like to make a couple of comments from your Citizens Advisory Committee. First, let me say the congestion problem will not go away. Some organization, whether it be this organization or individual groups, is going to have to take some action. I've been a long supporter of TBARTA, as have many of you, and even some folks that left. So I would encourage you to think very carefully about your next steps. You've heard from two key relationships, both CSX and our good friends at the Florida DOT. Both have told you that if you have a plan, they will discuss it. And a good plan will get their support. TBARTA is not going to develop that plan. Then you need to think about what organization is going to develop that plan. And with that, I thank you very much for your time and for your devotion to this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, shall we have the US 19?
US 19, Eric Hines from WSP will present the results of the feasibility study that we conducted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Eric Hines with WSP, we're the consultant on this, on the US 19 feasibility study. I just want to, before I get started, to acknowledge that the first time you're seeing some of this information. There's a lot of detail in this presentation, but in the interest of time, I will just hit on the key elements and conclusions. Provided in your agenda packet, so feel free to review that. Of course, we'll answer any questions.
Can you move that mic a little closer to you, please? I think that'll help everybody.
How's that? Is that better?
I think it's on, it's just not close enough.
Done? Okay.
Yeah.
So the purpose of this study was analyzing the feasibility of bus rapid transit along the US 19 corridor from State Road 52 down to the Gateway area. We really wanted to assess competitiveness for FTA funding as well as, identify an implementable project. So throughout this project, we conducted a significant amount of stakeholder coordination, whether it's through one-on-one briefings, coordination meetings with county and FDOT. And the study was guided by our executive team, which comprised of the transit agencies in Pinellas and Pasco, as well as the MPOs and FDOT. And so the study area was divided up into 4 segments. Throughout this process, it was a 3-step process. Phase 1 being determining where are the stations and how many. Second phase was how do we best provide this service, and then phase 3 was how do we find the most feasible option. During phase 1, we selected the number of stations, and you can see the data and the methodology listed here. So initially we started out with 44 stations. You can see them on the graphic on the right. It's a pretty comprehensive list. Using the ideal station spacing of 2 to 3 miles for this type of service, we established a target of between 11 and 18 stations, of which we landed on 15 stations. So once we moved into phase 2, we started to develop different alternatives with a couple of overriding themes, one being a low investment, the second being a high investment. Essentially there's 2 overarching alternatives. However, we ended up with a total of 6 because the key question was how do we best get to the Gateway area from the US 19 corridor. So, and you can see some of the elements of each. The low investment consisted of mixed traffic with transit signal priority and queue jump lanes, as well as some bus on shoulder operations. And then the high investment was BAT lanes and dedicated lanes. We evaluated each of these alternatives based on FTA criteria using a 3-point scale. Ultimately, the Roosevelt Boulevard alignment was selected to get to the Gateway. And as I mentioned, we ended up with 15 total stations, 5 in Pasco and 10 in Pinellas, and you can see them listed and shown in the graphic on the right. Once we got to phase 3, that was when we started to evaluate the project in terms of its cost effectiveness and its competitiveness for FTA funding, and analyzing different operational concepts. And the next series of slides is just to give you an illustration of what this type of service may look like in terms of roadways typical. So for the first segment, it would be mixed traffic in segment 2, bus on shoulder operation in the elevated portion of US 19, and then mixed traffic getting to Gateway. And then for the high investment, we would consider BAT lanes in segment 1. Apologize. Again, BAT lanes in segment 2. Dedicated transit lanes on the elevated portion of US 9 in segment 3, and then mixed traffic to Gateway. And just to give you a sense of taking care to ensure that this project connects to the local transit system, we did modify some of the local routes to connect into that Gateway proposed intermodal center. And you can see here some of the technology we assumed and priority and queue jump locations. So this really gets into the conclusions of the study. We ended up with, like I mentioned, the BRT alternatives. One set of alternative ended at State Road 52, but we did analyze a shorter segment, which the northern terminus was at Moog Road, which is just south of State Road 54. Upon analyzing those alternatives, it started to become apparent that maybe a premium BRT was not going to be necessarily competitive for federal funds at this time. So through coordination with our executive team, looking at the option of an express bus was forward. You can see some of the operating assumptions for the BRT. The hours of operations would be 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., operating every 15 minutes. And for the low investment, the ridership would be anywhere from 366,000 to around 383,000. For the high investment, it would be around 574 to 720,000. And there were two options for the express bus service, one being a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Service operating every 30 minutes. And with that, you would expect to see around 320,000 annually. But we did also analyze a peak only service, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. operating every 30 minutes. And with an estimated ridership of around 207,000 annually. So there's a lot of information on this slide, but I think the key metric to focus on is the total cost per trip, or the cost per effectiveness. And you can see down there the difference between the express bus and some of the BRT options. The express bus, you could see anywhere between $3 and $5 in terms of the cost per trip, whereas for the bus rapid transit option, it would be anywhere between $8.50 and $14. This sort of gives you a detailed cost comparison. For the express bus, estimated the capital cost would be around 7.1 million, the majority of that being investment in the vehicles. And when you compare that to the low investment of be anywhere upwards of $67 million to $162 million. So the recommendation for this project is to begin an initial phase of express bus service. It could be either the 12-hour or the peak only service as an initial phasing option to get ridership built up in the corridor. And as the corridor evolves over time and the land uses begin to change and there's more density in the US 19 corridor, we would recommend to begin to phase in some of those premium transit features such as TSP and Q jumps that you'd see in the low investment. And then ultimately, the long-term vision would be to look at premium options like dedicated lanes and a phase 3. So the next steps would be to obviously present to the TBARTA board and the MPOs, but also to start to determine what the local support would be in terms of funding, and have this option incorporated into the TDPs and long-range transportation. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you. I have some. Commissioner Holcomb.
Yeah, two quick questions. Did you analyze the time versus like a regular car trip from 52 down to Roosevelt? Compare those two. What would the bus take? What would a regular? Sure. Given no accidents or anything.
Yeah, well, it depends on the alternative.
Right.
The express bus option would be obviously a little less competitive, about 15 to 20 minutes longer than it would take for an automobile, but
Longer,
yes, in terms of time. But when you look at some of the premium, the high investment, it was a lot more competitive in the more the 5 to 10 minute range.
Okay. And second question, thinking of mostly Pasco, because I'm most familiar with Pasco and Hernando on 19, a lot of shops, a lot of stores, a lot of restaurants, fast food, some shopping. Are there any job centers that you kind of highlighted that a lot of commuters would use this for that you could discuss?
Yeah, in Pasco County, we did focus on some of their the activity centers that they have identified, one being the Main Street area, the Gulf View Mall, in coordination with some of the county officials there. There's significant redevelopment occurring in the Moog Road area. So those were some of the main locations that we looked at.
Can I address that? So they're not. So what the strategy that we've taken in Pasco County is to reimagine the land use along US 19 and to add the density that he's speaking of, because we have failed outdated retail a lot on that corridor. So for example, the old strip mall at Mugen 19 is under contract to be knocked down, and it'll be a vertical mixed use project there. We have another one at the border of Pasco and Pinellas. And then our Gulfview Mall is really failing. And I think it's the Moz Brothers still there. It's an outlet store. The Burdines, or one of the stores there's been knocked down. And is now about 400 apartment units. And that same company has purchased the Sears. And we're working with them as they put in more residential for it to be ready for that whole mall to be converted into a big mixed use complex. So we purposely are encouraging density on the 19 corridor.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
To speak to that, our Forward Pinellas board has been very focused on making sure that we add density on 19. And to that point, if you think back just 3 years ago to the way 19 looked north of Almerton and the way it looks today, it's unbelievable. So we're making great progress on that. And as someone who has very personal and direct experience on lobbying the feds for federal money for our Sunrunner line, I want to point out that it takes from 5 to 7 years to go through the 5 iterations and phases of federal funding for transit and transportation, public transportation. And I would like to move this forward, Madam Chair, knowing that before we get to the conclusion that we have an opportunity to really increase density, help to change the culture of using public transportation, and at the same time put a plan in place that begins to lay the groundwork at the federal level for what we're trying to do 6 or 7 years down the road. Because no matter what we do or what we vote on today, it is not going to come to fruition for at least 10 years. Keeping that in mind, I'd like to move that we continue this conversation. And I think your ridership numbers are way off, because I've gone from Pinellas to Pasco at different times of the day. And there's just a very small window where the road is open and not in bumper to bumper.
Yeah, bumper to
traffic.
bumper. Yeah.
So just saying.
Commissioner, I agree with you that we want to keep the discussion going, but it's probably going to be with some kind of MPO. Regional MPO.
Hey, you
But
think
I
that's
wanna
going to
keep it
happen overnight? We
Yeah,
got it.
We're going to work towards
Yeah.
it. Any other questions or comments on this? Thank you. We look forward to doing more work on this one.
Thank you.
With a more functioning,
Yeah.
ability to get it done.
All right, can we have the Pinellas County aerial gondola report? We have time for this one? Everybody? You good?
This would be, I believe, Stephen Dale, who is online. And right now, Stephen, you can share your screen if you'd like.
Perfect. Let me find the presentation here. There we go.
Very good. We can see it here. Thanks.
Okay, just let me put it into full screen here. All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to the TBARTA board for having us. My name is Stephen Dale. I'm with SCJ Alliance. I'm one of the co-leads of this study. We also worked on this study in combination with several subcontractors, including Stantec, Transpo Group, and Digisphere. And these are the results of the study. I'm going to go through it at a fairly quick pace. Please reserve questions and comments until the end. The purpose of the study was to do 5 things: to determine if aerial gondolas were well suited to the Tampa Bay area. Are there suitable alignments to serve Clearwater? If you don't know what happened through about halfway through the process, is after we conducted the SWOT analysis with stakeholders, after we conducted the analysis, it was determined that the St. Pete component of it, there was generally not much interest in it. And basically, we were instructed to cease work on the St. Pete component of the project and just focus our attention on Clearwater. So in terms of number 2, that's why you're seeing suitable alignments to serve Clearwater rather than Clearwater and St. Pete. Are the routes technically feasible? Are the projects financially viable? And is the public at large generally supportive of the project? In terms of stakeholder feedback, when I say stakeholders, I mean key groups, key organizations, key individuals. We conducted roughly about 4 dozen stakeholder engagement sessions before really commencing the study. And there were 5 key things that kept coming up repeatedly. There was strong interest in connecting downtown to the beach. It was this idea of unification of the beach, the aquarium area, and downtown. When we originally started, the assumption was this was about getting tourists to leave their cars downtown and go to Clearwater Beach. But we learned through the process that it's as much about the reverse flow of traffic as the inflow of traffic. This needed to be supportive of the improvements to Coachman Park, the Imagine Clearwater work, et cetera, et cetera. The gondola system should reduce, or at least reduce perceptions of traffic on the Memorial Causeway for beachgoers. And the gondola system should reduce friction of movement between the beach, the aquarium, and downtown. And this was a key thing, again, that's tied to that unification idea. And ultimately, the study should continue with optionality. And when I say this, it's important to understand that at the time the study was going on, the city of Clearwater was not in a position to commit to specific station locations, either at the beach/marina or in downtown Clearwater. So as a result, what we had to do is we had to run the feasibility assessment, keeping in mind that there was a lot of optionality on both sides of the alignment. So when we get to things like cost estimates and that, the ranges are a little bit wide, and that's because of this optionality that was required. In terms of our aerial gondolas well suited to the area, we can definitively say yes, there are successful systems operating in similar environments around the world. Point of interest attractions, urban transit attractions. In this situation, this is more of what we would call a hybrid system. It has both commuter purpose, and it also has a built-in novelty and recreational usage purpose. In terms of the physical environment, in terms of the heat, the humidity, climatization of the cabins are possible using the technology that we've selected. And in terms of rain, wind, and lightning and marine environment, these are common around the world. I know that the lightning is a particularly sensitive issue for people in the Tampa Bay area, given the amount of lightning you get. But be rest assured, the lightning capital of the world is Singapore, and Singapore has 2 or 3 cable car systems operating around year round. We also explored lightning protection systems that have been implemented successfully in Telluride, Colorado. And in the study, we recommend using them in this situation. And the vehicles are totally ADA compliant. This is what we call the 3S technology. It's got 3 cables. I'm not going to get into the technical details of it. But again, understand that this is not new what you're talking about here. This is going on around the world. These are systems in Italy, in Germany, in Vietnam, and perhaps most interestingly is this system right here in the top left in Toulouse, France. This just opened this year. It's a multi-station system that's fully integrated into their public transit network. In terms of are there suitable alignments? Yes, and there are many suitable alignments actually. This is just one example of what we call the rope line profile, which shows the locations of the towers, the locations of the stations in relationship to the various physical and natural features along the route. There are multiple rope line profiles that have been done for this project, and they are available in the study for your review. The main areas we focused on, you can see the marine station, and this again comes down to that optionality idea. We identified 3 or 4 station areas located in the marina, and we identified 4 station locations in the downtown station area. Really and truly, the station can be located virtually anywhere within these shaded red areas, with the exception of this gray area right here. And the reason for that is because we do not want to be traveling parallel to the causeway as it crosses the water. Running parallel to the causeway when it's just along the land and the spit, that's not a problem at all. So effectively, all of these options between the aquarium station, which we've imagined would be connected by a pedestrian bridge, but that wasn't part of the scope of this study, But between the aquarium station and the East Angle Point, the routes are identical to one another. We brought the towers down as much as we could to prevent any infringement on privacy at Island Estates. And we're basically utilizing the grass strip next to the causeway, and it would have no impact on the bike and running trail from there. One note about the aquarium, we did consult extensively with the aquarium, and they are very positive on this project. And should it move forward, they would like a seat at the table to help resolve how this station would connect in with their facility. In terms of the route specifications, the alignments are between 9,500 and 10,000 feet. The speed is up to 17 miles per hour, cabin capacity of 28 seated passengers, which is a little less than a city bus. We could actually put about 35 people in there, but we wanted to operate it from a perspective of comfort and leisure for riders. So we just did our calculations based upon seated passengers. System capacity would be up to 3,600 persons per hour per direction, and the wait time would be as low as 28 seconds. That means that every 28 seconds, a vehicle for 28 people departs a station. And the trip time, one direction downtown to beach, would be as low as 11 minutes. And obviously, we're not susceptible to mixed use traffic. In terms of the last mile, first mile connectivity, the main thing we realized is downtown Clearwater is overparked by a large amount. Some of the people at the city of Clearwater we spoke with even said that it was perhaps a factor of 2, as in there was double the amount of parking that was required on a standard weekday. And of course, remember, the beach is going to be most busy on weekends, evenings, holidays, those kind of times, right? So the reality of the situation is those are the times the existing parking is going to be completely vacant, because the vast majority of parking in downtown Clearwater is servicing office workers and government workers. So there's a delta here. There's an ability to leverage this parking. We don't need to build a new parking garage in downtown Clearwater to get the job done. And the key thing to understand is when you're paying $40, $50, $60 for parking in Clearwater Beach, not to mention the time you spend circling Clearwater Beach to find a parking space. The reality of the situation is when you're spending 50 cents an hour in downtown Clearwater, that delta economically allows riders to afford to ride the cable car. And that's really the key thing here. We also proposed a valet concept for downtown. And this was because, a lot of people said to us, well, I got my kids, I got my dog, I've got strollers, I got coolers, I got umbrellas. So we decided to look at it from the perspective of what are Floridians used to? And something that's very common there is valet. So the basic idea here would be drive to the gondola station, and you don't have to use the valet, but drive to the gondola station, pull your stuff out of your car, hop on the gondola, a valet takes it to one of the myriad of parking facilities that already exist in downtown. And then what would happen is on the reverse trip, because no one likes waiting for a valet to get their car back, right? We want to eliminate friction. So the idea here is once you swipe your ticket in order to return back downtown, that sends a signal to the valet station in downtown, and they have 11 minutes to go get your car and bring it back, which is more than enough time. So again, the idea of friction-free travel, we want this to be an easy experience for people. In terms of other first mile, last mile issues, both at the beach and downtown, we spoke with the Jolly Trolley. They're very enthusiastic about the project and are willing to work with us to adjust their routes to ease some of those issues. We also explored micromobility, autonomous transit, and even porters at the beach, for example, to help you get your stuff to the beach where you want to go. Again, all of this is in the study for your review. Existing user groups, there were 4 major groups. There were residents, beachside employees. This was a key thing that kept coming up as well. The businesses on the beach want to get their employees there cheaply and want to get them there predictably. It's not just about the fact that they don't want to be spending the money on their parking. It's the fact that if they get stuck in the traffic on that causeway, they can't necessarily make their shift on time. We're looking at the tourists that are staying on the beach and aquarium visitors. And there probably should be 1/5 group here that's noted, which is what we call local tourists. And a local tourist is, let's say, someone from Tampa or Hillsborough who normally doesn't go to Clearwater Beach, but maybe once or twice a year does so. That we would not consider necessarily a local. We would normally classify that as a local tourist because they're not routine users of the system. I'm not going to get into the details of the ridership summary, except to say that we use what are called streetlight data and models developed by our partner Transpo Group. And the basic idea is it uses cell phone data, anonymizes the data, and then extrapolates it across the wider population base, and it calculates origin and destination pairs. Based upon that analysis, Transpo came up with roughly 1.4 million riders per year on the system. We also know in this business, and sometimes transit professionals have a hard time understanding this, but please know that this happens. You build a gondola, people are going to ride it just for fun. It's just the way it is. Based upon our models and analysis, we would estimate roughly about 500,000 novelty riders would be using this system as well. The problem is those 500,000 novelty riders are also going to, some of them will double count in those 1.4 million utility riders. Those are people who are taking it to avoid the hassle of the causeway and avoid the high cost of parking on the beach. So what we did is we basically used a range of 1.4 to 1.9 million riders per year and sensitized our analysis based upon that. At the end of the day, it results in an 8.9% reduction in traffic on the causeway, and we estimated the fare at $15 per day. Per day is key here. Again, what we want to be able to do is if we have to unify this district, we can't have people reaching into their pocket every time they want to ride it. You want people to be able to hop on, hop off. If they're staying at a hotel, they can go for dinner downtown, they can go see a concert, they can go to the aquarium, they can go grocery shopping at the Publix. They need to be able to move back and forth freely. So we're imagining this as a day pass more than anything. And in terms of locals in the beach, the way this industry typically works is that the base price is the $15 a day, but the locals and the beach employees know the various passes that exist, let's say a seasonal or an annual pass, that would reduce their effective trip price, just probably somewhere between 50 cents and $1 per ride. So very reasonable. In terms of delivery and financing, city staff, pardon me a second here. City staff believe the project would need to be a PPP, public-private partnership. Obviously, there are many forms of public-private partnerships that exist. We've not recommended any specific PPP format, but all the various forms of PPP are available in this study. We did learn that the city may be willing to contribute modest funds to develop the project, not massive funds, but some funds. And the city may be willing to provide a conduit to municipal bonding in order to reduce the borrowing costs on a system like this. It is being seen as a private sector investment with some public sector involvement. And it is probably going to be a capital expenditure of somewhere between 124 and 184 million USD. And again, that is a wide range, and we admit that. And it's because of that optionality that we were instructed we had to preserve. When you're having to balance, 4 stations landside and 4 stations beachside, each with different functions, shapes, sizes, and all that, you're going to get a wide variety of costs. Annual operations and maintenance costs really don't matter from version to version, and they're estimated about $10 million at plus minus 20% per year. And that would include a capital reserve fund, such that at around the 15-year mark, you need to do a major rehab of the system. So the capital reserve fund is part of the annual operations and maintenance cost. So you're always stashing money away so that at around the 12 to 15-year mark, that money is available. The financial analysis we conducted reveals really strong economics and financial indicators that should get interest from the private sector. It would result in 89 full-time equivalent jobs. And let's assume checks in the mail, approvals and permits are all in place. You could be operational in less than 2 years. In terms of is the public support of the gondola, again, we've already talked about the stakeholder consultations we did. Generally speaking, the stakeholders are very, very supportive. Not everyone, you're never going to please everyone, but generally speaking, it's been either neutral and skeptical to positive. We very rarely found anyone who was just adamantly opposed to the project. We also conducted a very, very extensive public questionnaire. You probably saw it in the news or on your Facebook feed or something like that. It was very, very extensive. We actually got 8,300 responses, which is enormous. The vast majority of them are from the Tampa Bay area. We did, though, want to know what Clearwater residents specifically had to say, because, of course, it's their turf, right? So of those 8,300 responses, 17% were Clearwater residents, which actually works out to about 1% of the total Clearwater population. And just know that the questionnaire had basically it was a one computer, one vote situation. So unless you went and, filled out the questionnaire on multiple computers, you were restricted to one vote, or sorry, one response. So we know there's probably some double counting in that 8,300, but the vast majority of them are unique responses. 9% were Clearwater Beach employees, which was great to see. 33% were Pinellas County residents, non-Clearwater, and 48% were Florida residents. We assume, basically the greater Tampa Bay area. 76% were familiar or very familiar with the gondolas. 73% were likely or very likely to use the gondola. 31% to travel to the beach, and 38% to travel back and forth. Again, that idea of unification coming out of the survey data. 78% said causeway traffic prevented trips. That's a huge number. And oftentimes when it comes to people selecting not to do a trip because of traffic, it's not because the traffic is really that bad. It's that they've had one or two bad experiences. So the perception is that the traffic is bad. And that means you're leaving the city of Clearwater and Clearwater Beach are in essence leaving 78% of people that responded to the survey. They're just not going. That's a large number of people. And it is important to know that yes, the traffic on the causeway gets really bad when it's really bad, but it's not 8-10 hours a day, bumper to bumper. It's normally clustered in and around the lunchtime period and the 5 p.m. period, which makes intuitive sense. So again, this would unlock this 78% of people who want to go to the beach, spend their money, spend their time in Clearwater. These last two responses really surprised us because they sort of defy what we all know about taxpayers and what they do or do not want to spend their money on. 69% of Clearwater residents were possibly or definitely open to city tax dollars being used for the project, and 69% of Pinellas County residents were possibly definitely open to county tax dollars being used for the project. So in terms of conclusions, the 5 questions we started with: gondolas are suited to the Tampa Bay area, suitable alignments exist, the routes are technically feasible, the project, we believe at this stage of analysis, is financially viable, and by the by the private sector, and the public is generally supportive of the project. In terms of next steps, we see 2 paths forward. Path 1 is what we're calling the public project, where either TBARTA, Clearwater, FDOT, whomever, take on the project as a PPP, whichever PPP you decide upon. The city would have to designate station locations downtown and at Clearwater Beach, and the above entities or combination thereof would fund preliminary design and tendering, just as a standard PPP project works. And the above entity or entities would tender the PP project. The downside to this is it does have significant costs to the public sector with extended timelines, because of course it's now on the public sector to find the funds and do all the necessary studies required to get you ready for preliminary design and tendering ultimately. This is the longer and more costly version of doing this. Path 2 would be going as a private project. And the way that this could work is that the city signals interest in the project and possibly advances design to a preliminary level. A private investor or consortium would propose to the city of Clearwater through their unsolicited proposal process to either TBARTA, Clearwater, FDOT, whomever. More than likely, it would probably have to go through the city of Clearwater's unsolicited proposal mechanism, which exists and we reviewed and we think is actually pretty good from a private sector perspective. The gondola project could be combined with the new developments that are going in downtown Clearwater, and TBARTA, Clearwater, FDOT, or some combination thereof would have to act as the lead agency for environmental permitting and approvals. City and the FDOT would facilitate permitting on their lands. This has significant cost savings for the public sector and would dramatically decrease timelines associated with getting a shovel in the ground. That's it. Thank you.
Fascinating. Board members, any questions? I see this happening personally.
I wish this was up yesterday.
I see this happening. I think it's going to be a reality. Yeah.
I have one question. Is there a distance with the gondola where it doesn't make sense to have gondola commuters and it makes sense to do something else like buses or something else?
It does, but it's less of a factor about the distance. We can travel as long as we want. It's more about the frequency of the stations, because all of our cost is in the stations, and stations, like any transit system, the more stations you have, the more inefficient the system becomes, right? If every time you're stopping for 2 minutes or a minute and a half or a minute, that's where really problems come. We've done some analyses which are interesting where I can't remember what the exact number is, but because of the short wait times with the gondola, that's where you really make up time, right? A BRT, I believe, if I recall, the previous presentation said 30-minute headways between buses. Well, what if I miss that bus? I'm waiting for 30 minutes, right? The reality is with a gondola, you have a vehicle coming every 28 seconds. In our situation, we can get down to as low as 10 seconds between vehicles. And that's really where you pick up time. So yes, that bus can speed ahead. And there are certain situations where the bus will be faster or train will be faster. But when you factor in the total travel time, including wait times, gondolas really are very competitive up to quite long distances, but I don't have a specific number for you, unfortunately.
Are you thinking of Brooksville to St. Pete?
But yeah, longer distance, go across the bay or something like that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I ski and so I am very familiar with gondolas. As a matter of fact, I sometimes put my bike on one and ride it up to the top of the mountain and ride down the mountain. I just did that this summer in Utah or last month. It's fascinating. I think it's going to be reality. That's what I have to say about that one. Okay, I just don't know if we're going to be involved in it. Okay, thank you very much. We are past our time. I think everything else can just move to the next meeting.
Yeah, the rest is for information purposes, so we're finished with the agenda.
And I see that Pasco County, now you're gonna have to drive in that traffic. It's reverse traffic though, up my way. And will you be there, Jeff? November 18th?
I won't be a commissioner anymore.
Yeah, well, we'll miss you.
November 7th is my last day.
But we look forward to
So when
working
I
with
come to
you.
Tallahassee, let me in. Why are you laughing? All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you for serving here and
Yeah.
you drove a long
It's
way
been
to
great.
come down here and we really appreciate your commitment to coming here.
And I appreciate your service.
We look forward-
That's some good information to the committee and usually my partner on this side. So
Go ahead, Commissioner Long.
Well, I was just gonna say, we're looking forward to working with you in the legislature.
Yeah.
Don't forget us when you get there.
No, we need a great Tampa Bay region as well as.
you see, he hesitated though when I said, when I come, you better let me in. He was like, all right, okay.
I could get you a little trouble.
And I was gonna bring you some.
They are well.
snacks, you know, yeah.
I probably shouldn't say this, but since we're gonna be probably disbanded, what came to my mind was one of the thieves on the cross said, when you enter paradise, don't forget us, so.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
I'm